Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. Sitting alone on the couch, the faint glow of the television flickering in the dark room. It was already well past midnight, and the rest of the house was silent, everyone else long asleep. The show I had been watching had just ended, and I was about to turn off the TV when the screen suddenly went black. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, something that would fix itself if I waited a few moments. But when nothing changed, I reached for the remote. The room felt unnervingly quiet now. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, but everything else was still. I pressed the power button again, but the TV screen remained blank, as if mocking me. I stood up and walked toward the television, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. I pressed the power button on the TV itself, and still nothing happened. Then, just as I turned to sit back down, the silence was shattered by a voice. It was soft, almost a whisper, but it was clear enough to be unmistakable. The voice called my name, my full name, the way only someone who knew me well could. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced around the room, but there was no one there, no sign of anyone at all. I looked back at the TV, half expecting to see something, some kind of message or an image on the screen, but the black void remained, still and unyielding. The voice came again, this time a little louder, but still as calm and eerie as before. "Come closer, it's time." My skin crawled, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I felt a cold chill in the air, despite the warmth of the room. I wanted to ignore it, to tell myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the voice sounded too real, too familiar. It wasn't just some random sound, it was purposeful, directed at me. I stood there, frozen, trying to convince myself to move, to leave, but something kept me rooted to the spot. My breath quickened, and I could feel my palms start to sweat. The voice continued, no longer just calling my name, but urging me. "It's waiting for you. Don't be afraid." The words were smooth, almost soothing, but there was a coldness underneath them that sent a shiver through my entire body. I knew I should have left the room, should have run to wake someone, but a strange force held me there. My feet moved involuntarily, stepping closer to the television, closer to the source of that unsettling voice. As I moved, the air around me seemed to change. The space felt heavier, thicker, as if the room itself had transformed into something otherworldly. I could still hear the hum of the refrigerator, but everything else was muffled now, as if the house had grown distant. The voice spoke again, this time with a slight echo. "Come closer, we've been waiting for you." My chest tightened, and I felt a sudden rush of fear, real gut-deep fear. I should have turned and run then, should have broken away from the pull of whatever this was, but something within me kept me moving forward, as if I were bound by invisible threads. I reached out to touch the screen, and just as my fingers brushed the glass, the TV flickered to life. But instead of the usual channels or shows, the screen was filled with static, swirling in patterns that didn't make sense. The voice returned, now louder, more insistent. "It's time. Come closer." I could almost hear it behind me now, as if the sound was no longer coming from the television, but from all around me. My heart raced, and panic started to rise in my throat. I spun around, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. The voice was still empty. Nothing but shadows clinging to the walls. I turned back to the TV, my mind racing, trying to process what was happening. The static had changed again, now shifting into what appeared to be an image. A face. But it wasn't any face I recognized. It was pale, distorted, like an old photograph that had been overexposed. The features were blurred, but the eyes were clear, staring directly at me. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The eyes on the screen seemed to follow my every move, tracking me as I moved away. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I felt a surge of adrenaline flood my system. For a split second, I thought I saw the figure blink, and then the voice returned, softer, almost pleading. "It's too late to run." That was enough. I turned and ran. I didn't care that I might look foolish, running from an empty room with nothing but a malfunctioning TV. The voice, however, didn't stop. It followed me, echoing in my mind. "Come back. It's not over yet." I reached the hallway, my feet stumbling over the carpet, my mind spinning. I had to get to my room, to the safety of a locked door. But even as I moved, I could hear it. I finally reached my door and slammed it shut, locking it behind me. I stood there, gasping for air, trying to steady my nerves. The house was still, the only sound my own breathing. But the voice wouldn't leave me. It lingered in my mind, like a distant whisper, a promise that something would come for me. Story 2? I thought I was alone in my house. It was a quiet afternoon, and the soft hum of the air conditioning was the only sound breaking the stillness. My laptop sat on the coffee table, its screen glowing in the dim light of the living room. I had been scrolling through some articles online, half listening to the faint buzz of distant traffic outside. Everything felt normal, until it didn't. The first sign that something was off came when the screen on my laptop froze. The web page I was looking at stopped loading, and I pressed the touchpad, trying to bring it back to life. But it didn't respond. I clicked again, harder this time, and still nothing happened. A strange unease began to settle over me as I sat back in my chair, staring at the blank screen. Maybe it was just a glitch, I thought, but even as I tried to rationalize it, a knot of discomfort began to form in my stomach. I reached for my phone to check for updates, hoping it was just a problem with the Wi-Fi. But as my fingers brushed the edge of the phone, I heard it. The faintest sound. It was almost like a soft tap, like someone had lightly placed a foot on the floor. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The noise was coming from the living room, but that was impossible. I was the only one here. I was sure of it. Oh, I stood up from the couch, my feet moving slowly across the floor as I made my way to the living room. My eyes darted around, scanning the space for any signs of movement. The room was just as I'd left it. The coffee table cluttered with books, a pile of laundry in the corner, the faint glow of sunlight filtering through the blinds. But there was a stillness to the air, a weight that hadn't been there before. I took a deep breath, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again. This time the sound was louder, clearer. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. I felt my pulse race as I stood motionless, straining to listen. It was coming from the hallway that led to the bedrooms. My throat went dry. I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't seen anyone enter. I was alone. I was certain of it. The footsteps continued, growing closer. I couldn't make sense of it. My mind spun with possibilities. Maybe it was the neighbor's kid running around outside, or perhaps the house was settling. But the longer I stood there, the more the sound felt real, like someone was walking through my home. I took a hesitant step toward the hallway, my breath shallow, the air thick with the tension I couldn't shake. I crept forward, each step more cautious than the last. My legs felt heavy, as though the floor beneath me had become a sinking marsh, pulling me down. I told myself I was being paranoid, that there was an explanation, but I couldn't ignore the fact that the footsteps were getting closer. It sounded like someone was walking slowly toward me. Whoever it was, they were not trying to hide their presence. In fact, they were moving as if they had every right to be here. When I reached the end of the hallway, I stopped. My heart pounded in my chest, a sharp ache in my ribs. The house was unnervingly quiet, but I could still hear the soft rhythm of footsteps behind the walls. It was a steady, deliberate pace, like someone trying to be discreet, but not quite succeeding. The unsettling part was that it felt like the person was trying to let me hear them. It was as if they wanted me to know they were there. I grabbed a baseball bat from the corner of the closet and held it tightly in my hands. I didn't know what I was expecting, but the need to be ready to defend myself was overwhelming. The footsteps had stopped. A tense silence filled the air. I took a deep breath, pushing down the wave of panic that surged through me, and started moving toward the living room again. My mind raced with questions. Was it an intruder? A prank? My imagination? I couldn't make sense of it, but the longer I stood there in the darkening hallway, the more I felt like something wasn't right. There was an unnatural stillness in the house now, as if every corner, every shadow, was holding its breath. I hadn't heard anything in a few minutes, but that only made the silence worse. It was the kind of silence that rang in your ears. I moved into the living room, my eyes scanning the room once more. There was no one. No sign of anyone. No doors were open, no windows cracked, no shadows lurking in the corners. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My gaze shifted toward the hallway again, and that's when I saw it. The faintest outline, just at the edge of my vision. A shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was too solid, too deliberate. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I took a step back. I wanted to call out, to shout at whoever was hiding in the dark, but my voice caught in the throat. My body had turned to stone, every instinct screaming at me to leave, to get out of the house. But I couldn't move. I stood frozen, the shadow slowly growing clearer until it was no longer just a blur. There, in the hallway, standing perfectly still, was a figure. It wasn't tall or imposing, but the shape was unmistakable. I could see the outline of a person, their features obscured by the dim light. It was as if they were waiting for me to notice them, standing perfectly still, unmoving. My heart thudded in my chest as I realized I wasn't imagining it anymore. The figure was real, and it was watching me. Story 3 was just another routine shift at the call center. The dim fluorescent lights hummed above me, and the endless ring of incoming calls blended into the background noise of the office. My coworkers were hunched over their desks, talking to customers about everything from product issues to billing questions. I had heard it all before, and after a few hours, the monotony settled in like a heavy fog. I picked up another call, barely glancing at the screen before pressing the headset to my ear. "Thank you for calling. This is Sarah. How can I assist you today?" I said in the practiced tone I had perfected over the past few months. There was a brief pause, and then a soft, labored breath came through the receiver. It was heavy, as though someone was struggling to catch their breath. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't unusual to hear heavy breathing now and then from someone who was stressed or upset, but this felt different. It was slow, drawn out, almost as if the person on the other end was trying to say something but couldn't. I waited a moment, ready to offer help, but the silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as the seconds ticked by. "Hello?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The air in the office felt suddenly colder, and I glanced around, half expecting someone to be watching me. My desk was empty, the other agents lost in their calls. I shook my head, chalking up the unease to the late hour. It was just another odd customer, I told myself. But then the breath came again, louder this time, raspy and almost guttural. I sat up straighter in my chair, my fingers hovering above the keyboard, ready to disconnect the call. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned in closer to the headset, straining to hear. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice quieter now. The breath came again, followed by a strange clicking sound, like someone was tapping their fingernail on the receiver. I froze, my throat tightening. There was something unsettling about the noise. There was no response, just the rhythmic sound of breathing. It was beginning to feel like I wasn't talking to a person at all. The hairs on my arms prickled as a wave of dread washed over me. I glanced down at the call screen, but it was just a blank line of data, no details about the caller. My heart began to race, and I quickly pulled up the caller's information, only to find nothing. No name, no number, no history. The line was dead, but the breathing continued. I reached for the headset's mute button, intending to end the call and reset the system, but before I could press it, the breathing stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was more suffocating than the sound had been. My pulse quickened, and I found myself looking over my shoulder again, as if expecting someone to be standing behind me. But there was no one, just the empty desks and the distant hum of office machinery. I tried to shake off the unease, but the feeling gnawed at me. I wasn't sure why, but I couldn't bring myself to hang up. It was as if some part of me knew that I needed to hear more, that there was something important in that heavy, labored breath. The silence dragged on for what felt like an eternity, each passing second adding to the growing sense of dread in my chest. Then, out of nowhere, the voice came, a low, rasping whisper that sent a jolt of fear through my entire body. "Help me," it said, barely audible but clear enough to make my skin crawl. I felt my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't a request for customer service. It wasn't a typical problem or complaint. It was a cry for help, but it sounded wrong, like it was coming from the person at all, but from somewhere else entirely. I gripped the edge of my desk, my mind racing. Should I report this? Should I end the call? But something in my gut told me that wouldn't be the right move. The voice spoke again, softer now, almost pleading. "I'm here. I need you." I could hear a faint tremor in the voice, like whoever or whatever was on the other end of the line was struggling to hold it together. I could feel the eyes of my coworkers on me, though they hadn't said a word. I was aware, suddenly, of how quiet the office had become, of how distant the sounds of the other calls were. It was like the air had thickened, pressing down on me. The only sound left was the faint, panicked breathing on the other end of the line. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. The voice didn't respond immediately, and for a moment, I thought the call might have dropped. But then I heard it again, a soft, rasping sound, followed by a gurgling noise. My hand was trembling as I clutched the headset tighter, trying to force myself to focus. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice shaking with anxiety. My ears turned this green, and I felt the warmth in my hand flow to... The response came, slow and deliberate, as though each word was being carefully chosen. "Don't hang up," it rasped. I'm trapped." The words sent a cold chill down my spine. "Please, Sarah," it said, using my name now. "They're coming for me." My blood ran cold as the voice faltered, followed by more heavy breathing. My heart hammered in my chest, and I instinctively pulled the headset away, my fingers fumbling to end the call. But I couldn't. The line stayed open. The voice, no, the thing, was still there, waiting, breathing heavily in the darkness. And no matter what I did, I couldn't bring myself to disconnect. Story 4. It was late at night, and I had just finished scrolling through social media on my phone, trying to wind down after a long day. The blue light from the screen illuminated the dark room, casting a faint glow across my bedroom. I was lounging in bed, my body sinking into the mattress as I mindlessly flicked through posts, liking pictures, and reading random updates. I wasn't really paying attention anymore. The day's exhaustion was pulling me towards sleep. Then, without warning, the screen went black. For a brief moment, I thought the phone had died, but when I tried pressing the power button, it flickered back to life. My heart skipped a beat when I saw that a new message had appeared on the lock screen, sent from an unknown number. I didn't recognize the area code or the number itself, but what caught my attention was the notification. There was a photo attached. Curiosity tugged at me, even as an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I hesitated, unsure whether to open the message or just ignore it. Something about the situation didn't sit right, but I couldn't shake the need to see what was inside. Slowly, I unlocked my phone and opened the message, hoping it was just some random spam or an old acquaintance trying to reach out. When the photo loaded, my blood ran cold. The image was blurry at first, but as it focused, I saw a shot of me lying in bed, fast asleep. My chest tightened in disbelief as I stared at the photo. It was taken from an angle that suggested the person had been standing at the edge of my bed, watching me while I slept. I immediately felt a chill run through me, my mind racing with questions. How had they gotten this picture? I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen despite the unease flooding my body. The room felt colder, the silence more suffocating. My first instinct was to check if the windows were locked, but my phone kept me rooted to the spot, the image still haunting me. The way the photo was taken, up close, almost intimate, made me feel exposed, like someone had been watching me for far longer than I realized. My hands trembled as I tapped the phone's screen to zoom in. It was unmistakably me, lying in the same position I had been just moments before. The dim lighting from my bedside lamp cast long shadows, and I could see my face, peaceful in sleep. But there was something off about it, something I couldn't place. A feeling of dread began to creep up my spine, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I quickly scrolled through the conversation to see if there was any other message. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find, but there was only one more line of text beneath the photo. It read, "You look peaceful. I wonder how long you've been like this." My breath hitched in my throat, and my heart began to race. Who was this person, and how long had they been watching me? I felt trapped, as though the walls of my room had closed in around me. Panic set in as I started to check my surroundings. I pushed myself off the bed and made my way to the window. I pulled the blinds apart, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the dark yard outside. There was nothing. Just the quiet stillness of the night, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, but the shadows offered no answers. I glanced back at the phone, considering my options. Should I respond to the message, ignore it and hope it went away? My thumb hovered over the screen as I debated. Part of me wanted to scream into the phone, demand to know who this was, but another part of me feared the consequences. What if this person was someone close, someone who knew exactly where I lived and what I was doing? I felt exposed, vulnerable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Minutes passed, and I found myself unable to stay still. I had to do something. I grabbed my jacket from the chair and threw it on, stepping into the hall to check if anyone else in the house was awake. My footsteps echoed in the quiet house, and I couldn't help but feel like the darkness was closing in around me. The walls seemed to press tighter with each passing second, and I felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. I reached the living room and grabbed the landline, dialing the police number with shaking hands. As the phone rang, my mind spun in 1,000 directions, trying to piece together the puzzle of what was happening. Who could have taken the photo? Was I in danger? My heart raced as I waited for someone to pick up, the silence of the house around me amplified by my fear. The phone finally clicked, and a calm voice on the other end of the line answered. I quickly explained the situation, barely able to get the words out as my anxiety surged. The dispatcher assured me that they would send someone over right away, but even as I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. My eyes flicked back to my phone, and the message stared back at me, taunting me with its chilling words. I didn't know what to do next, or how long I would have to wait for help to arrive. I didn't even feel safe inside my own home anymore. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside, seemed to carry a threat. I kept my phone in my hand, almost afraid to put it down, as if doing so would leave me exposed. The feeling of being watched never left me, and I knew that something was very wrong. This was only the beginning of a nightmare I couldn't yet understand. Story 5. It was late, and the house was unusually quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of my computer as I worked, my fingers tapping away at the keyboard in the dim glow of the screen. Outside, a storm had been raging for hours, the wind howling against the windows and occasional lightning illuminating the room in sudden flashes. My mind was focused on the task at hand, writing, editing, making sense of the words on the page. But the tension in the air, the storm, and the darkness outside made the silence feel unsettling. Then, without warning, everything went dark. The room was swallowed by an eerie blackness, and the soft hum of my computer faded to nothing. For a moment, I sat frozen, waiting for the usual flicker of the lights, the quick surge of power that would restore everything back to normal. But this time, the darkness lingered, and I could feel a sense of unease creeping in. A blackout wasn't unusual in this area, especially with storms like this one, but the stillness felt different. The storm seemed louder now, like it had grown more intense, more alive. I was about to stand and grab a flashlight when the power flickered back on. It wasn't a slow, gradual return, but an abrupt, sharp flash, as though the room was being yanked back from a void. The lights buzzed briefly, then steadied, and the low hum of my computer returned, accompanied by the faint click of the fans coming back to life. I sighed, relieved, but then my eyes moved to the screen. Something wasn't right. My webcam was on, the little green light glowing beside it, and the camera itself was focused directly on me. I blinked. It made no sense. I hadn't opened any video call or camera app. In fact, I didn't even use the webcam unless I absolutely had to. But there it was, active, as if it had been running the entire time. My heart skipped a beat, and I immediately checked the room. There was no one else in here. No one could have accessed my computer during the blackout, and yet there was no denying the evidence. The webcam was on, and I was staring right into it. For a moment, I sat there, staring at the green light, my mind racing through possibilities. Could the power surge have triggered something? Had I accidentally clicked something, even in my haste to finish my work? My hands hovered over the keyboard, trying to figure out what to do next. It was an unsettling thought. Was someone watching me? The idea of being observed, even by a machine, sent a shiver down my spine. I opened the webcam settings, intending to turn it off, but the camera feed on the screen didn't change. The green light still burned steadily beside it, like an ominous eye fixed on me. I clicked through the control panel and even tried shutting down the camera app entirely, but nothing worked. The webcam wouldn't shut off. It was as if it had a mind of its own, locked onto me with an unsettling persistence. I felt exposed, vulnerable. My thoughts raced even faster now, mixing paranoia with confusion. I reached for my phone, thinking I could call a friend or maybe even the police if this was something more serious. But the battery was low, and when I checked the time, I realized I hadn't charged it in days. Of course. I should have expected this, but in the chaos of the storm and the sudden blackout, it seemed to be another thing working against me. The phone's screen went dark just as I was about to open an app. It felt as if everything, every little thing, was conspiring to trap me in this moment. I took a deep breath and tried to shake off the rising panic. This had to be some kind of malfunction. a glitch caused by the power flicker. But the more I thought about it, the more the idea of it being a malfunction seemed absurd. I had never experienced anything like this before. The thought of being watched by an unknown entity, something or someone that I couldn't even see, made my skin crawl. There was something sinister in the way the camera stayed on me, as if it was silently studying me, waiting for something. I stood up, my chair scraping across the floor, and walked toward the window. Outside, the storm had reached its peak, the sky dark and swollen with clouds. The trees were bending violently in the wind, their branches thrashing against the side of the house. Despite the fury of the storm, I felt disconnected, as if the storm outside had no bearing on what was happening in this room. There was something more urgent, more personal about the situation. Something that went beyond the storm's chaos. When I turned back to face my computer, the webcam was still on. The green light glowed softly, like a silent, accusing eye. I walked around the desk, unplugging the computer's power cord from the wall. For a moment, I felt a sense of control return, the power to stop whatever was happening. But when I turned back to face my computer, the camera itself was defying my attempts to shut it off. My blood ran cold. It was as though the computer, the camera itself, was defying my attempts to shut it off. It wasn't just a technical malfunction anymore. It felt deliberate, as if something, or someone, was intentionally keeping the webcam on. The eerie thought that I wasn't alone in the room, that someone had been watching me, sent a shiver down my spine. I turned away from the computer, feeling nauseous. There was no explanation for it, no logic that could justify what was happening. I was alone in this house, but the webcam and the light it emitted made me feel like I was being watched from somewhere beyond the screen. I don't know how long I stood there, my mind racing with theories and fears. The camera kept recording, and I knew that in that moment, nothing I did would stop it. I had no idea if it was just malfunctioning or if something darker was at play. And as the storm raged on outside, I realized I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a blackout. Something else was happening, but like some dark, mature's memory had begun the moment the lights went out. Story 6. I thought I was just getting tired when the screen on my phone went black. I had been scrolling for hours, unable to shut off my brain after a long day. My eyes were heavy, and the soft hum of the evening seemed to lull me into a stupor, but I wasn't quite ready to go to bed. As the phone slipped from my fingers, I tossed it on the bed beside me and stretched, glancing toward the clock on my nightstand. The room was bathed in the dim light of a street lamp filtering through the blinds, and I let my eyes linger on the quiet shadows of my room. The silence was so deep that it almost felt oppressive, but that was typical for late at night. I could hear the faint sounds of distant traffic and the occasional rustle of wind against the window, but nothing unusual. I was just about to settle under the covers when I heard a soft click. It was a subtle noise, but unmistakable, a sound that didn't belong, coming from the direction of my bedroom door. I froze, holding my breath for a moment, waiting for something else to follow. The house was old, and the doors tended to settle or creak, but this click, it was more deliberate than anything I had ever heard before. Something was wrong. I sat up slowly, straining my ears to catch any other sound, but there was only silence. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, and the cold shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't just the click, but the sense of being watched, a feeling I couldn't shake. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to convince my racing thoughts that it was just the house settling, or maybe my imagination running wild. But as I lay there, staring at the door, I realized I couldn't remember locking it when I'd come in earlier. I always locked the door before bed, out of habit, but I didn't recall hearing the usual click of the lock turning into place. I swallowed hard, now aware of how quiet everything seemed. Too quiet. The weight of the silence made the click echo in my mind. I crept out of bed, my feet barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. The room felt colder now, and my breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. Each step I took toward the door felt heavier, as though the floor beneath me was pressing back against my every movement. My hand hovered near the doorknob, a bead of sweat forming on my forehead as I considered what might be on the other side. I reached for the knob, but as my fingers brushed it, the door rattled slightly and the click came again. This time, it was louder, more distinct, as if someone, or something, on the other side was trying to open the door. My heart pounded in my chest, and I quickly recoiled, backing away from the door. Panic surged through me, and I debated whether to call out or just hide under the covers. I didn't trust myself to make a sound, though. The idea of alerting whatever was on the other side felt foolish, dangerous even. I quietly moved toward the window, trying to keep my movements as silent as possible. My thoughts raced. Was someone trying to break in? Had I heard a noise from outside? I pressed my ear against the cool glass, but all I could hear was the same faint hum of the city unchanged. The silence in the room felt suffocating now, and as I turned back toward the door, I saw the handle begin to twist. My blood ran cold. The motion was slow, deliberate, like someone testing the lock to see if it was secure. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there frozen, but my body wouldn't respond. The sound of the twisting knob filled the room, and I could hear the soft scrape of metal against wood. Too familiar, too real. With a desperate, almost instinctual movement, I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp from my nightstand, and held it out in front of me like a weapon. The knob turned again, and this time, the door inched open, revealing only darkness on the other side. No figure, no person. Just the empty hallway, stretching out into the rest of the house. But I wasn't fooled. I took a hesitant step forward, still clutching the lamp. The door creaked open farther, and I saw something that made my stomach churn. Footprints in the dust on the floor, leading away from the door, as if someone had been standing just outside. My pulse quickened. Had they been watching me? Waiting for me to move? A sudden rush of noise, footsteps, soft but quick, echoed from the hall. I spun around, but there was nothing behind me. The room was still empty, just the faint smell of old wood and the faint sound of my own breathing. I looked back at the door, wondering if the strange, unseen presence was still lurking just outside, waiting for the right moment to strike. I moved toward the door again, this time with more urgency. I couldn't stay in that room, not with the thought that someone, or something, was so close, so near. I needed to get out to make sure I was safe. But as I reached for the handle once more, I froze. The click came again, this time from behind me. I whipped around, heart in my throat, but there was no one there. The room remained silent, the air thick with dread. I felt an overwhelming sense of terror surge through me, and for the first time that night, I understood that whatever was happening was not just in my head. It was real, and it was getting closer. Story 7. It was late, and I had just settled into my couch after a long, exhausting day. The room was dimly lit by the flickering light of the television, which was playing some late-night show I wasn't particularly paying attention to. My eyelids were heavy, and I could feel the drowsiness creeping in, but I didn't want to go to bed yet. The hum of the TV and the distant sounds of the city outside were the only things that kept me company. Suddenly, the screen went dark. The light from the television disappeared without warning, leaving me in total darkness. I blinked, unsure if my eyes were adjusting, but the room remained pitch black. I fumbled for the remote control, my fingers brushing over the cold plastic as I tried to turn it back on. But nothing happened. It was as if the TV had shut down completely, and I was left alone in the silence. That's when I heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible at first, came from behind me. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The voice wasn't mine, and it certainly wasn't anyone I recognized. It was a whisper, faint, but unmistakable. I turned around quickly, but the room remained empty. My mind raced, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I wondered if I had imagined it. The whisper came again, this time clearer, as though it was right behind my ear. I scrambled to my feet, my pulse pounding in my ears. The air felt colder now, thicker, as if the darkness had somehow seeped into the room. I glanced around nervously, half expecting something to jump out from the corners, but there was nothing. No movement, no sounds, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Yet the feeling of being watched, of being followed, lingered. The whisper came once more, closer now, almost as if the voice was coming from within the walls themselves. "Leave," it said, its tone commanding, with an undertone of malice that sent a shiver through my entire body. I couldn't tell if it was an echo or if the voice was growing stronger, but my feet were frozen to the floor. I didn't want to leave. Why should I? This was my home, and I wasn't about to let some strange voice drive me out. But the air around me seemed to thicken with each passing second, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I finally took a step back toward the door, my heart thudding violently in my chest. My hands were shaking as I reached for the light switch, desperate to illuminate the room and erase the oppressive feeling that had taken over. I flicked the switch, but the light didn't come on. The darkness persisted, as though it had become something tangible, something that resisted being dispelled. Panic surged through me, and my instincts told me to run. But where would I go? The whispers, now more insistent, began to echo around the room. "Go, now!" The voice was louder, more urgent. I backed away toward the door, but something about the air felt wrong. Heavy, like it was holding me in place. The whispers grew louder, like a chorus of voices, all repeating the same word: leave. I rushed to the door, throwing it open with trembling hands. The cool night air hit my face, offering a fleeting sense of relief. But even then, the whispers followed me. They didn't come from inside the house anymore. They seemed to float in the air around me, swirling like a haunting wind. I looked back at my darkened home, the windows black as ink, and for a moment I considered running. But where could I go? What if the voices followed me? For a moment, I stood there in the cold, staring at my house as if waiting for something. Waiting for the whispers to stop. Waiting for some sign that everything was going to be okay. But they didn't stop. They only grew louder, more frantic. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my skin crawling as though invisible hands were reaching for me. I had to do something. Without thinking, I slammed the door shut behind me. The sudden noise seemed to snap the air back into place, and the whispering abruptly ceased. The house fell silent, the shadows retreating into their corners. For a moment, I stood there, breathing heavily, wondering if it had all been some bizarre nightmare. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something had happened, something beyond my understanding. I stumbled down the stairs and out into the street, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. What had caused the TV to turn off? Where had that voice come from? It felt like the air itself was alive, as though the house had become something else entirely. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me from inside, waiting for me to return. As I walked away, I tried to calm my breathing, telling myself it was just my imagination. But as the night wore on, and the city noises became distant, I couldn't shake the unease. The whispers hadn't just been a figment of my mind. They had been real, and whatever had caused them was still out there. I knew, without a doubt, that it wasn't over, and that thought made my heart race all over again. Story 8. I was sitting in my room idly browsing the internet when I stumbled across a website I didn't recognize. It looked like one of those strange, obscure pages you find while wandering down a rabbit hole. Unusual fonts, cryptic images, and links that led to nowhere. I hadn't planned on spending much time on it, but something about the layout intrigued me. I clicked on a few links just out of curiosity, when suddenly my computer screen froze. I waited a moment, expecting the usual lag, but nothing happened. The cursor wouldn't move, and the screen remained unresponsive. For a few seconds I sat there, staring at the frozen screen, hoping it would unfreeze on its own. Then, as if by magic, the image on the monitor began to shift. The background changed from the weird graphics of the website to something much more familiar. A view of the very room I was sitting in. I blinked, not understanding what was happening. The room was identical to the one I was in, with all the details I could see from my desk. The chair, the open window, the lamp on the table. but there was something unsettling about it. It wasn't a photo. It felt like a live feed. I stood up from my chair, my heart beating faster now. The room on my screen looked exactly like the one I was in, but something was wrong. It was as if the image was caught in a moment of stillness, almost too perfect. My first instinct was to reach for my phone and check my surroundings, just to confirm everything was real. But as soon as I moved, the image on the screen shifted again. It seemed to follow my movements, almost as if it were tracking me. And that's when I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the room in the screen's reflection. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was eerily still, and for a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I leaned in closer, trying to make sense of it. The figure was me. No, it couldn't be. It was a perfect, almost lifelike replica of me, wearing the same clothes I had on. I quickly spun around to look at the room behind me, but no one was there. I checked every corner of the room, running my hand along the walls. But I was completely alone. The reflection on the screen remained unchanged, as if it existed in a parallel reality. I shook my head, convinced that this had to be some sort of glitch or prank. Maybe I had accidentally activated some kind of webcam feature, though I didn't remember doing so. I reached for my webcam cover, but as I placed it over the camera, the image on the screen didn't change. The figure, me, was still standing in the room, motionless. It was as though the image had been captured in real time. But it wasn't coming from my camera. There was no explanation for how it was happening. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. In a moment of panic, I tried to force close the browser. I hit Ctrl+Alt+Delete and opened the task manager, but my computer didn't respond. The screen remained frozen on the unnerving image of the room. I tried restarting the computer, but the same thing happened. Once it booted up again, I found myself looking at the exact same view of my room. The figure of me, standing still in the corner, hadn't moved an inch. It was like I was trapped in a loop. The more I tried to fix it, the more I felt the walls closing in. The air in the room suddenly felt colder, and I shivered. It wasn't just the temperature that had shifted, though. There was an oppressive weight to the silence, like something unseen was watching me. I reached for the mouse again and clicked around, trying to force the computer to show me something, anything else. But each click only brought me back to that same silent unmoving. Was the only thing visible. I tried covering my eyes, looking away, but when I opened them again, the image was still there, waiting. I couldn't tell if it was some kind of optical illusion, or if my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe I was imagining it all. Or maybe the room had actually changed, and I had no idea what was real anymore. My breathing was shallow, and my hands trembled. I was beginning to wonder if I had somehow entered a different reality. Then, something changed. The figure on the screen, the version of me, began to move. Slowly it shifted, as though coming to life, stepping forward toward the center of the room. My heart skipped a beat, and I stumbled backward, tripping over my chair. I watched in disbelief as the figure on the screen began walking toward the very spot where I stood. It was moving in perfect synchronization with me, mirroring my every motion. I raised my hand in shock, and it raised its hand at the same time. Panic surged through me. I backed away from the computer, my legs weak, but the figure in the screen continued to advance, step by step. I had to get out of this room. My mind raced, trying to figure out how to escape whatever this was. The walls seemed to close in tighter as I looked at the computer, and I realized with horror that the room was becoming smaller. Or maybe it was my perception of it. I couldn't tell anymore. I made a rash decision and grabbed my phone, dialing for help, but before I could even hear the phone ring, the screen blinked. Just once. And then it went black. The image was gone, the room returned to normal, the silence around me deafening. I was alone again, standing in the middle of my room, unsure if what had just happened was real or some strange dream. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. I would never visit that website again. Story 9. The video call had been going smoothly for about an hour, or so I thought. I had been chatting with my colleague, Mark, about a project we were both working on. The usual discussions about deadlines and strategies flowed naturally, but then something strange happened. The screen on my laptop, which had been showing Mark's face clearly, suddenly froze and everything went still. At first, I thought it was a simple glitch, just a temporary freeze due to a poor internet connection. I shifted in my chair, fiddling with the mouse to try to reset the call. But nothing seemed to work. The image remained frozen, Mark's face locked in a half smile, eyes fixed and unblinking, like a photo rather than a live call. I clicked the buttons, tried reloading the page, but the call wouldn't resume. Then, just as I was about to give up and shut down the laptop, something caught my attention. In the background behind me, just as the screen froze, I saw it. A quick movement. It wasn't much, but enough to make my heart skip a beat. A shadow seemed to dart across the room, too swift to make out what it was, but distinct enough to know it wasn't just the flicker of the screen. I spun around in my chair, scanning the dimly lit room behind me. My apartment, normally silent, now felt strangely unsettled. And he's started to creep up my spine. A knot quickened as I tried to rationalize the movement. Perhaps it was just a trick of the light, or a reflection from something in the other room. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. I wasn't sure what I had seen, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized the process from childhood was really simply an imagination. I still gazed before me. I stood up from the chair, cautiously walking toward the corner of the room where the movement had seemed to originate. My eyes scanned the shadows, looking for anything out of place. The room was sparsely furnished, with only a few pieces of furniture and a couple of personal items scattered around. Nothing was amiss, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Turning back toward my laptop, I saw that the screen was still frozen. The call had ended, Mark's face now completely still, locked in that strange, unsettling expression. I felt an overwhelming need to check if the door was locked, even though I knew it had been when I sat down. I rushed to the door, checking the bolt and lock mechanism. It was secure, and the hallway outside was empty. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, and I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. My mind raced, running through possible explanations. I tried to convince myself that it was all just a trick of my imagination. Maybe the movement had been a trick of the screen, a flash of pixels or a reflection from something outside the frame. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. There was something about the way it had moved, the suddenness and fluidity of it that didn't sit right with me. I glanced at the clock on the wall. Only a few minutes had passed since the call had frozen, but it felt much longer. The room seemed quieter now, as if the air had thickened with tension. I reached for my phone to check if I had any missed calls or messages, but before I could unlock it, my laptop screen flickered again. This time it wasn't just frozen. Lines of static and digital noise covered the screen, like the call was being interrupted by some unseen force. I quickly closed the laptop, feeling a chill settle in my chest. Oh, whatever had just happened, it didn't feel like a simple technical issue. The room seemed different now, as if it were holding its breath, waiting. I stepped away from the desk, backing toward the window to look outside, but the familiar cityscape did little to comfort me. The streets were empty, the buildings distant and indifferent. I pulled the curtains closed, trying to shield myself from the unnerving sensation of being exposed. For a moment, I stood there in silence, unsure of what to do next. My mind kept replaying the movement behind me, the brief flicker of something just out of sight. I wondered if I had imagined it. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or maybe the shadows had played a cruel game with my perception. But no matter how many times I tried to explain it away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had been in the room with me. I made my way back to the desk, taking a deep breath before opening the laptop again. This time, I didn't expect anything to happen. The screen lit up, the usual desktop background flashing into view. There was no sign of the previous glitch, no static or flickering, just the calm, familiar sight of my files and icons. But when I clicked on the browser to check my emails, a new window appeared. One I hadn't opened. It was a message, plain and simple. It wasn't from Mark, nor anyone I recognized. The subject line was just a string of random letters and numbers, but the message itself sent a cold shiver through me. I see you. My heart pounded in my chest, and I slammed the laptop shut, feeling the weight of the words lingering in the air. I stood there, motionless, as if the room had somehow become a cage. The space around me felt thick with an invisible presence, the walls closing in. I tried to tell myself that it was just a prank or some random spam, but deep down, I knew that this was no coincidence. Something was watching me, and it wasn't going away. Story 10. It was typical evening when it happened. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, half watching the TV and sipping on my cup of coffee. The power surge came without warning. One moment, everything was calm, and the next, the lights flickered briefly and a high-pitched hum buzzed from the electrical outlets. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just another glitch in the power grid. But then I realized my phone had died. It was fully charged just moments before, and now it was unresponsive. I pressed the power button, but nothing happened. I tried holding it down, hoping for a restart, but still the screen remained black, My heart sank as I remembered the photos I had on it, important pictures, moments I couldn't afford to lose. The more I tried to restart it, the more panicked I became. I fumbled with the charging cable, but the phone wouldn't turn on. It felt like time slowed down, and I was stuck in that moment of helplessness, wondering if my phone was gone for good. Then, just as I was about to give up, the screen flickered back to life. A flash of white, and then the familiar boot screen appeared. A wave of relief washed over me. But as the phone came back online, I noticed something strange. The last image I had seen before it died was still there, frozen on the screen. It was a photo of my front door, but it wasn't one I had taken. I felt a chill creep up my spine as I looked at it more closely. The photo was taken from the outside, and it was recent. It was clear from the faint glow of the porch light that it had been snapped only minutes before. I sat there, staring at the image, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't taken that photo, and there was no way anyone could have. The door was locked, and there had been no one around the house when I checked earlier. I checked the timestamp on the photo, and my heart skipped a beat. It was taken at exactly the same moment the power surge had happened. My mind raced as I tried to think of a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. There was no way the phone could have taken that picture by itself. I felt a wave of unease settle over me as I scrolled through the rest of the images on my phone. They were all familiar, all photos I had taken or saved over the years. But that one, of the front door, stood out like a sore thumb. I opened the photo again and zoomed in. The quality was clear, the details sharp, but there was no indication of who took the picture or how. I thought maybe it was some weird glitch, a corrupted file, or something like that. But the more I looked at it, the more unsettled I felt. It looked so real, so present. And yet, I hadn't taken it. I stood up and walked to the front door, my pulse quickening. The night air felt unusually cold as I stepped outside and looked around, half expecting to see something, or someone standing nearby. The street was empty, as it usually was at this hour. The dim light from the porch illuminated the small front yard, but there was no one there. Nothing seemed out of place. I checked the door lock again, reassured myself that everything was secure, but the unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that something had been watching me. I went back inside, still holding my phone, but now I was more hesitant to use it. I kept glancing at the screen, half expecting another strange image to pop up, but there was nothing, just the same photos I'd seen 1,000 times before. I opened my gallery again, scanned through the photos, and tried to find something that would explain the bizarre image. Maybe it was a mistake, some automatic feature of the phone that I didn't understand. I was desperate for an explanation, but no matter how many times I looked, nothing made sense. I tried to distract myself, watch some TV, but I couldn't focus. Every few minutes my eyes would drift back to the phone, still sitting on the table, waiting for me. Eventually I picked it up again and went back to the photo. The front door, the same image, the same moment. And then, as I stared at it, I thought I saw something that hadn't been there before. A shadow in the background, just beside the door. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. My heart skipped a beat, and I zoomed in, my fingers trembling. The shadow seemed to shift as I enlarged the image. It looked like a figure, but not someone I recognized. A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned off the lights in the living room, sat in the dark, and stared at the phone. I ran through the possible explanations in my mind. That was it some sort of malfunction, a technical issue, or something more. The idea that someone had been outside my door, watching me, gnawed at the back of my mind. But who? I thought about calling the police. But for what? A photo that might not even mean anything? Still, the unease kept me on edge, and every little noise in the house sounded amplified in the silence. Hours passed, and I tried to sleep, but the thought of the photo haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The figure, the shadow, the lingering presence that had no explanation. My mind kept racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. I eventually fell into a restless sleep, but the unease never left me. And when I woke up the next morning, the photo was gone. No trace of it, not even in the deleted folder, just gone. But I could still see it in my mind clear as day. Story 11. It was late, and I was immersed in one of my favorite video games. The familiar sounds of explosions, gunfire, and the strategic movement of my character filled the room, a welcome distraction after a long day. I was so absorbed in the game that I barely noticed the flicker of the screen at first. A split second later, the screen went completely black, and the sound cut off abruptly. I sat there, blinking in confusion, wondering if the console had overheated or if something had gone wrong. I hit the power button on the console, waiting for it to reboot, but the TV remained stubbornly blank. I checked the cables and everything seemed fine, so I tried turning it on again, this time pressing the reset button on the console itself. Still nothing. As I leaned back in frustration, I grabbed my phone to check something else, perhaps as a distraction from the technical issue. Just as I unlocked my phone, I noticed a new message notification. It was strange, because I didn't recognize the number. It wasn't saved in my contacts. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was some kind of spam message or a wrong number. But curiosity won out, and I tapped on the message. The first text read simply, "Are you ready?" I stared at the screen, unsure of how to respond. I hadn't signed up for anything recently, and it was odd that someone would be texting me at this hour. Maybe it was just a prank, or someone I knew messing around. I decided to ignore it and put my phone down for a second to focus on fixing the game again. But before I could, another message appeared on the screen. The second message was even more unsettling. "It's already begun." My fingers froze on the phone, a cold shiver running down my spine. I felt a sudden unease settle over me, like something was wrong, like I was being watched. I quickly checked the number again, but it was just a string of random digits, nothing that could give me a clue about who was texting me. It didn't seem like a typical prank. I stared at the black TV screen, wondering if the two events were connected. I tried rebooting the system once more, but the game didn't come back on. It felt as though something had cut off all my attempts to interact with the world around me. Then, as I sat there, waiting for the console to respond, another text came through. "Why aren't you playing?" it read. Panic started to rise in my chest. How did they know I was playing a game? I hadn't even told anyone what I was doing tonight. The idea that someone could be watching me, or even controlling what was happening, made my stomach turn. I quickly typed a response, hoping to find some explanation. "Who is this?" I texted back, my hands trembling slightly as I hit send. The reply came almost instantly. "You know who I am." The words were cryptic, but something about them felt deeply personal, as though the sender knew me in ways I couldn't comprehend. A wave of dread washed over me. I started scanning my memories, trying to think of any possible connections to a person who might send such strange messages. But I couldn't think of anyone who would know enough about me to do this. As I sat there, the screen in front of me still blank, more messages began to pour in. "I see you. I can hear you. Come back." Each message made my anxiety grow deeper, my thoughts spinning faster as I tried to figure out what was happening. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing. The silence was suffocating, the only sounds my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. It taken. I looked back at the TV, hoping it would come back on, hoping that somehow the whole thing was just a weird coincidence, but it remained dark, as if mocking me. The messages kept coming, each one more unsettling than the last. "You're not alone. You can't escape. The game is waiting." I started to feel like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare. It was impossible to explain how the messages seemed so direct, so personal. How did the sender know I was trying to play a game? It was as though they were in my mind, reading my thoughts, anticipating my every move. I turned my phone over, trying to block out the notifications, but my fingers shook too much to focus. In a burst of frustration, I sent a final message: "Leave me alone." I waited for a reply, hoping that somehow this would end. But the next message came just moments later, and it made my blood run cold. "It's not that simple." The words haunted me, like they were meant to trap me in this unexplainable reality. The room seemed to close in on me, and I realized I hadn't moved in what felt like hours. The game, the texts, the empty screen, nothing made sense. I wanted to turn everything off, to escape, but it felt like there was no way out. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming now, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was just beyond my line of sight, waiting for me to make the next move. Then, as if responding to my thoughts, the TV flickered back to life. This time, the screen wasn't filled with the game I'd been playing earlier. Instead, it showed an image of me, sitting on the couch, staring at the screen. My heart stopped. The picture wasn't just a reflection. It was as if the TV was showing me from a perspective I couldn't possibly see, a view from behind me. I scrambled to look around, but there was nothing there. The next text popped up, chilling in its simplicity. "I'm here." I dropped the phone, my breath ragged and my mind spinning in terror. Somehow, the game and the mysterious sender had become part of my reality. I wasn't sure what was happening anymore, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to find a way to stop it before it consumed me completely. Story 12. I had always been fascinated by urban legends. The mystery, the eerie tales that seemed to blend folklore and truth had captivated me since I was a kid. So when I found a documentary about them online, I settled in for a night of eerie storytelling. The screen flickered to life, and I adjusted my chair, prepared to dive into the world of haunted roads, cursed objects, and strange creatures that lurked just beyond the edge of our perception. The documentary started with the usual slow build-up, grainy images, spooky music, and a deep voice narrating the legend of a haunted town that no one dared visit. I leaned in closer, intrigued. As the narrator spoke of long-forgotten rituals and ghostly apparitions, the eerie visuals on the screen seemed to draw me deeper into the story. It was one of those documentaries that made you feel like you were on the edge of something you couldn't quite understand, but you couldn't look away from either. Then, without warning, the screen flickered. It wasn't just the typical brief glitch I'd seen before. This was different. The image of the monitor seemed to warp, as if the video feed had been distorted by some invisible force. The colors twisted, the edges blurred, and for a split second everything went black. My first thought was that maybe the laptop had overheated or that the Wi-Fi had cut out. I moved the mouse to wake the screen up, but nothing happened. I clicked again, harder this time, but the screen remained dark. As I sat there staring at the black monitor, an uneasy feeling began to creep over me. It wasn't the typical frustration of a technical issue. It was something else. I glanced around my dimly lit room, half expecting to hear the soft whir of the laptop's fan or the click of keys, but the silence was suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I hesitated for a moment before pressing the power button on the laptop, hoping it would reset. But as the screen came back to life, I froze in place. In the corner of the monitor, just beyond the edge of the video, a face appeared. At first, it was a small, faint distortion, almost like a shadow cast from the darkness behind the screen. It was hard to make out the details, but I could see the general shape of a face. Pale, distorted, with dark eyes that seemed to stare right through me. The moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it or if it was a trick of the light, but the longer I stared at the screen, the clearer it became. The face grew sharper, more defined, until I could see the details. It wasn't just a shadow, it was a clear, contorted expression, twisted in a way that made me shudder. The eyes were unnaturally wide, the skin an unnatural, sickly shade of white, and the mouth stretched into a grotesque smile that looked far too wide for a human face. It was a smile, but it wasn't the kind of smile that conveyed joy or happiness. It was something darker. Something wrong. My hand hovered over the keyboard, and I thought about closing the laptop, about shutting everything down and pretending it hadn't happened. But I couldn't look away. The face didn't move at first, but it felt like it was watching me. I could feel my heartbeat quicken as I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a glitch, I thought. Maybe it was some kind of visual effect from the documentary that had malfunctioned. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. This wasn't a technical error. This was something else. I stared into the face, trying to focus, trying to concentrate. But whatever it was, something else. As if on cue, the face shifted slightly, tilting its head as though acknowledging my gaze. My breath caught in my throat. I was paralyzed, unable to move or even look away. The face seemed to grow larger, as if it was creeping out from the corner of the screen, inching closer to me with every passing second. The dark eyes seemed to follow my every movement, and for the first time, I felt a real sense of dread settle in my chest. I scrambled for my phone, thinking that I could at least take a picture, show someone what I was seeing. But as I glanced back at the screen, the face had changed. It wasn't just in the corner anymore. It was everywhere. It was as if the entire screen had become distorted. The image from the documentary twisting and warping around the face that now dominated the monitor. The lines of the documentary blurred, replaced with the horrific visage of that unnatural smile. Those eyes. My heart raced, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on my skin. I slammed my hand down on the power button, desperate to turn the laptop off. The screen flickered again, but it didn't go dark. Instead, the face seemed to stretch across the entire screen, its distorted smile widening, the eyes even larger and more unblinking. My fingers were trembling as I tried to close the laptop, but the screen wouldn't budge. It was like the laptop had become frozen, locked in place, as if the face was somehow controlling it, preventing me from escaping. The room felt colder, and I realized with a jolt that I had been holding my breath the entire time. Finally, with a sharp click, the screen went black. For a moment, I thought it was over. I exhaled shakily and reached for the laptop to power it down completely, but as I opened it again, I was met with something worse. The face was no longer on the screen. Instead, it was in the reflection. In the black screen of the closed laptop, I could see it clearly now, standing behind me. The pale face with those wide, empty eyes and that twisted grin. It was as if it had been there all along, waiting. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest, but the room was empty. There was nothing there, nothing but the soft glow of the lamp beside me. I turned back to the laptop, my hand shaking as I closed it for good. The documentary, the face, the distorted image. It all felt like a nightmare I couldn't escape. But even as I closed the laptop, I couldn't shake the feeling that the face was still watching me. Even now, I'm not sure if it ever really went away. Story 13. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter, the screen dimming as I walked out of the room. The house was quiet, still. The only sounds the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the clock on the wall. I was just running out to the car to grab my jacket, nothing more than a quick errand, a simple task. But when I came back, I found the phone was on, the screen lit up in an eerie glow. At first I thought maybe I'd accidentally pressed something while putting it down, a stray tap that had unlocked it. But then I saw the video. My heart stopped. It was a recording of me, walking out of the front door, just as I had done minutes ago. The timestamp showed it had been taken while I was still outside, no more than a few seconds before I came back inside. I stood frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears. How was that even possible? The phone had been on the counter, untouched. I had made sure of it before leaving. I played the video again, watching myself from the perspective of someone standing just beyond the door. There I was, my back to the camera, walking away from the house with my keys in hand. The view was exactly as it should have been, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, as I watched, something shifted. In the corner of the frame, just as the video ended, there was a movement. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A shadow, flickering like a candle flame. It passed across the doorway, and for a split second, I could have sworn it looked like someone was standing there, watching me. My stomach lurched, and I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. I rushed over to the counter, checking the phone for any other strange activity. The only app open was the camera, and it seemed to be working normally. There was no sign of tampering or hacking, no explanation for what I had just seen. I checked the storage file, nothing out of the ordinary there either, just a few old photos, videos, and some messages I hadn't gotten around to deleting. I glanced over my shoulder, the silence of the house suddenly oppressive. The kitchen was too quiet now, and the air felt thicker, like it was pressing in from all sides. I felt the faintest prickle on the back of my neck, the sense that I wasn't alone. But when I turned, there was nothing behind me. No one. The kitchen was just as I had left it. The dishes in the sink, the light overhead humming faintly. Still unsettled, I went to the front door and checked the locks. Everything was secure, just as it had been when I left. No signs of forced entry, no reason to believe anything had changed. Yet the unease gnawed at me. How could that video exist if I hadn't touched my phone while I was outside? I looked back at the screen. The video was still playing. My phone was now showing footage from a different angle, one I didn't remember. It was still me, walking down the driveway, but now the camera was facing the door. It seemed impossible. There was no way the phone could have captured this unless it had moved, or unless someone else had used it. The shadow from earlier appeared again in the new video, only this time it was clearer, more defined. It was a figure standing just beyond the frame, barely visible at first, but as I watched, it seemed to grow closer, as though it was moving towards the camera. My throat tightened. This couldn't be real. It had to be some glitch, some weird mistake with the phone. But everything about it felt too real. I tried turning off the phone, but it wouldn't shut down. No matter how many times I pressed the power button, nothing happened. The video continued to play, now showing the angle from inside the house, just as if someone had positioned the camera in the hallway to catch me from behind. I was frozen, my hands trembling as I tried to process what I was seeing. Suddenly, there was a sound from behind me. Something small, like a breath, or maybe a footstep. I whipped around, my heart leaping into my throat, but the kitchen was still empty. The only movement was the flickering light of the phone's screen. But when I turned back, the video had changed again. It was no longer just footage of me. Now there was someone else in the frame. The figure appeared slowly, emerging from the shadowed corner of the hallway in the video. It was tall, too tall to be anyone I recognized. The face was hidden, obscured by a hood or something else, but the presence was unmistakable. The figure didn't move much, just stood there, watching. It was as if the phone was showing me something that had already happened, something I hadn't seen, but was now being forced to witness. I reached for the phone again, my hands shaking uncontrollably, but before I could stop the video, something new appeared on the screen. A message. Text. Simple and direct. "I'm right behind you." My blood ran cold. The kitchen was still empty, but the words on the screen were clear, as if someone was standing there watching me read them. I spun around again, my breath caught in my throat. The air was still, but the temperature had dropped noticeably. My breath came out in a visible puff of fog. The kitchen light flickered once, twice, and then the shadow appeared again. This time, it was standing just behind me in the reflection of the microwave. A dark figure, too close, too real. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the phone and hurled it across the room, watching it crash into the wall. The screen went black, but the sense of being watched didn't fade. I stood there, shaking, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling, unable to move, my eyes scanning every corner of the room. I couldn't bring myself to go near the phone. I knew. It was still recording, still showing that shadow, still showing me. And it wasn't done yet. The story 14. It was a typical evening, one of those quiet nights when the world outside seemed to fade away. I was sitting at my desk, typing away on my computer, when I suddenly heard the unmistakable hum of the power flickering. The lights dimmed briefly before everything went black. For a moment, I sat still in the dark, wondering if the storm had caused the outage or if something was wrong with the electrical grid. It wasn't unusual for the power to cut out in my neighborhood, but I always hated the feeling of uncertainty that came with it. I waited for a few minutes, hoping the lights would come back on, but when they didn't, I decided to check my phone. As soon as I unlocked it, the screen blinked to life, showing that everything was normal, no notifications or updates. I sighed, thinking that it was probably just a temporary glitch. I set the phone aside and waited a bit longer, knowing the power would likely return soon enough. A few moments later, the lights flickered back on and I heard the familiar hum of the refrigerator kicking back into action. The computer screen, which had gone completely black during the outage, began to glow once again. I moved my mouth to wake it up and tried to continue working, but as soon as the screen came to life, I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. There, on my monitor, was an image of me, sleeping in my bed. Swelteringly black during the outage. There was no not switching, completely off on my phone. I blinked, unsure if my eyes were playing tricks on me. The picture was eerily clear, as if someone had snapped it from above while I was asleep. I didn't recognize the angle of the shot. It was too high up, like someone had been hovering above me. The room around me in the picture looked exactly like my bedroom, but the more I stared at it, the more unnerving it became. How could someone have gotten this photo? I hadn't heard anyone in my apartment, and I certainly didn't remember anyone coming in while I was asleep. The image on the screen was both chilling and intimate, as if someone had been standing at the edge of my bed, watching me while I slept. The way the photo was framed made it clear that the person who took it was close enough to be able to capture the contours of my face, the rise and fall of my chest as I breathed. I was frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. My mind raced, trying to piece together how this could have happened. My first thought was that it was some kind of glitch, maybe a corrupted file, but everything felt too real. I stared at the photo for a few seconds longer, my breath shallow, before quickly minimizing the window. I opened several other programs, hoping to distract myself, but the image kept replaying in my mind. The unsettling sense of being watched began to seep into my thoughts, making me feel exposed and vulnerable. I had no idea how the photo got there, and I didn't even want to think about who could have taken it. Could it have been someone from the building? A neighbor? My mind spiraled to the possibilities, only deepening my sense of dread. I quickly opened the file folder where all of my personal photos were stored, hoping to find some kind of explanation, some clue that could make sense of this. But when I clicked through the folders, everything appeared normal. There was no sign of any unauthorized images or files. I considered that maybe the power surge had caused a glitch, that the photo somehow ended up on my desktop by accident. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. This felt deliberate. My eyes flicked back to the photo, which was still open in a tab on my browser. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a warning of some kind. Was someone trying to send me a message? My stomach churned with anxiety, and I felt a sudden urge to check the locks on my windows and doors. But before I could move, I heard a soft noise behind me. Something small, almost imperceptible. I turned, heart racing, but there was nothing there. Panic started to settle in. I felt a tightness in my chest, and my hands shook as I picked up my phone again, scanning through recent calls and messages. I checked the security app I had installed, but there were no alerts or suspicious activity. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. It felt like I was being watched, like someone knew my every move. I glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight, and the apartment was silent except for the hum of the computer and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I debated calling someone, maybe a friend or family member, but I wasn't sure what to say. I would believe that someone had taken a photo of me sleeping, and worse, that it had somehow ended up on my computer screen. I didn't want to sound paranoid or crazy, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed impossible to ignore. Whoever took that photo knew exactly where I was, and they had access to my personal space, my privacy. The air in my apartment felt heavier now, as if the walls were closing in around me. I couldn't focus on anything other than the strange image that had appeared on my screen. My mind kept drifting back to the photograph, replaying it over and over. How had they gotten so close? Had they been watching me for days, weeks, maybe longer? I didn't know who to trust anymore. I didn't even feel safe in my own home. I stood up abruptly, my legs feeling unsteady as I made my way to the front door. I couldn't explain it, but I felt the overwhelming need to leave, to get out of the apartment, even if just for a few minutes. Maybe the fresh air would help clear my mind. As I grabbed my jacket and reached for the door, I glanced back at the computer screen one last time. The photo was still there, its cold, unblinking gaze staring back at me. Story 15. The night had fallen thick and quiet around the house. I was sitting on the couch, my laptop in front of me, finishing up some work. The soft glow of the screen lit up the room, providing the only light in the otherwise dark apartment. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, but I barely noticed. My focus was entirely on the document open in front of me, the words flowing easily as I typed. Then, without warning, the screen went black. It wasn't the usual fading or flickering that I was used to when the computer was about to die, but a sudden, complete shutdown. I froze for a second, expecting it to be some minor glitch. But when I tapped the power button, nothing happened. The laptop remained dark, unresponsive. I tried pressing the keys, holding down the power button longer, but there was no change. The chill crawled up my spine as I stared at the lifeless screen. It had been working perfectly fine just moments before. I reached for the charger, thinking maybe the battery had died unexpectedly. As I fumbled for the plug beneath the desk, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a sharp, sudden vibration, like it was trying to grab my attention. I pulled it out, assuming it was a notification from a friend or a random email, but the message on the screen stopped me in my tracks. "I see you." The message was brief, cryptic, and chilling. What made it worse was the fact that it came from a number I didn't recognize. I stared at the screen for a moment, blinking, my heart rate quickening. It couldn't have been from one of my friends. They all had my contact information saved, and I knew no one would text me something so eerie, especially out of the blue. My fingers trembled as I checked the number again, trying to make sense of it. It didn't even have a proper area code, just a jumble of digits. A wave of unease washed over me. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone standing there, just out of sight. The stillness of the apartment seemed too quiet, too empty, as if something had shifted in the air. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end, but I quickly shook the thought away. It was probably just a prank, or a wrong number. Maybe it was something you shouldn't say. Man, I tried to ignore the message and put the phone down, but the words, "I see you," kept repeating in my mind. I was alone in the apartment, as usual. There was no one else here, no reason to feel this unsettled. Yet, my mind kept going back to it. Who would send something like that, and why? A part of me wanted to call someone, but I didn't know who. It didn't seem like something worth alarming people over. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just overreacting. As I turned my attention back to the laptop, I noticed something odd. The power light, which should have been off, was faintly glowing. It wasn't the usual bright indicator of the battery charging, but a dim, almost imperceptible flicker. I frowned, reaching out to touch the laptop again, but before I could, my phone vibrated again. This time, the message was even more unnerving. "Don't look away." My breath caught in my throat. The room suddenly felt colder. The simple command, "Don't look away," seemed to carry a weight, an implied threat. It made my skin prickle with fear. I looked at the phone again, trying to calm myself. I searched the number once more, but there was still no sign of who might have sent it. No name, no indication of where it came from. It felt like the text had been sent from nowhere, just a phantom message that had materialized in my inbox. A sharp sound broke my concentration, and I turned to see the dim glow of my laptop flickering again. This time, it seemed to be coming to life on its own. The screen blinked, as if the laptop was attempting to restart. I reached for the power button once more, but it wasn't working. The screen flashed again, and I could make out the faintest outline of a figure in the darkness. It was so brief, just a shadow passing across the screen, but it was enough to send a jolt of panic through me. I took a step back, my phone now clutched tightly in my hand. Something about the situation felt wrong. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I realized that I wasn't just dealing with a random glitch. The combination of the strange message, the inexplicable laptop behavior, and the growing sense that I was being watched made my skin crawl. The phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another message. "Look up." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't moved from where I was standing, and the words sent a cold wave of dread through me. Slowly, reluctantly, I raised my eyes, half expecting to see something staring back at me from the shadows. The room was empty, just as it had been when I first sat down. Yet the sensation that I was being observed grew stronger, more pressing. My eyes scanned the dark corners of the room, searching for anything out of place. My heart hammered in my chest, but there was nothing. No one. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the product of too many late nights and too much time spent alone. But the messages kept coming, each one more cryptic than the last. Each one seemed to push me further into a state of unease. "You can't hide." I slammed the phone down on the couch, my mind spiraling. I ran to the front door, checking the lock, the windows. Everything was as it should be. Yet, I felt like I was losing control. The unease was becoming unbearable, a suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. My laptop, still on the desk, continued to flicker in and out, its screen now showing something I couldn't quite make out. Just as I was about to grab my coat and leave, the phone vibrated once more. This time, I couldn't bring myself to check it. The screen had started to glow with an unnatural light, like a warning. Then, my phone rang. Story 16. I was binge-watching a horror series, the kind with dark shadows, creepy soundtracks, and just enough jump scares to keep me hooked. It was a Saturday night, and I'd been sitting in the same spot for hours, barely moving, except to grab more snacks or adjust the volume when a particularly unsettling scene came on. The story had been getting progressively weirder, each episode building on a strange sense of dread. But it wasn't until the screen froze that I began to feel like something was off. At first I thought it was just a glitch, a buffering issue, or a problem with my Wi-Fi. The show had been running perfectly until that point, so I assumed it would resolve itself in a moment. But as I stared at the frozen image of the main character, his face twisted in a look of sheer terror. I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. The strange thing was, it wasn't just the character's expression that bothered me. It was the way his eyes seemed to be locked on mine, like he was staring directly at me through the screen. I reached for the remote to pause and unpause, hoping to fix whatever was causing the glitch, but nothing happened. The screen remained frozen, and the character's eyes stayed fixed on me, unblinking. It was subtle at first, just a nagging feeling that the stare wasn't quite right. But soon the unease grew into something much more intense. It was as though the character wasn't trapped in the scene at all. He was aware of me, of my presence in the room. I tried to look away, but the image of his eyes seemed to follow me. I turned my head, shifting my focus to the darkened room around me. But something told me that if I looked back at the screen, his gaze would still be there, waiting. My heartbeat quickened, and I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone anymore. The sound of my own breath seemed unnaturally loud in the room, and the air felt thicker, as if something in the space had shifted. I looked back at the screen. The character's expression had changed slightly. His mouth was now slightly open, as if he were about to speak or scream, though no sound came from the TV. But his eyes, those eyes, remained locked on mine. I could almost feel them, heavy and invasive, as though they were pushing through the glass of the screen and into the very room where I sat. A sudden cold draft swept across the room, and I shivered, glancing toward the window to see if it was open. It wasn't. I turned off the TV, trying to shake off the growing sense of discomfort, but the room didn't feel the same. It felt wrong. like the air had changed, like something was just out of reach, but still too close for comfort. I set the remote down on the coffee table and got up, pacing around the room to distract myself. I thought maybe I'd had too much screen time and my mind was playing tricks on me, but the unease lingered, refusing to let go. The strange thing was, I didn't hear the usual buzzing of the TV shutting off or the quiet hum of the electronics. There was nothing. Just a deep silence. I hesitated, glancing back toward the TV, wondering if I had imagined it all. But when I turned around to face the screen again, it was on. Again, showing the same scene, the same character, staring at me. The image flickered for a moment as if the TV were glitching again, but this time, I could see it more clearly. The character wasn't just staring. His face was now pressed against the screen, as though he was trying to break through, trying to get out. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, and his mouth twisted into a silent scream. I stumbled backward, heart pounding in my chest. This couldn't be real. It had to be another trick of my mind. I grabbed the remote again, but the screen wouldn't respond. The character on the TV, still locked in that expression, kept pressing against the screen as though the glass itself were softening under his touch. I could almost hear the faint sound of him breathing, though the TV was completely silent. The whole room felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me, and my skin prickled with the sensation of something invisible hovering just behind me. I backed away from the TV, my legs weak, my hands clammy. Every part of me screamed to leave the room, to turn off the TV, to stop watching, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The character's face, distorted and desperate, was now closer to the glass, his hands pressed against it, his fingers splayed as if trying to crawl through the screen. I could see every detail of his face now, every fleck of sweat on his forehead, every twitch of his lips. And then, just when I thought I might lose my mind, the TV blinked, and the character was gone. The screen went black for a moment, and I thought it was over. I breathed out a sigh of relief, convinced that whatever strange hallucination had taken hold of me had finally ended. But then, a new sound came from the TV, a voice low and distorted, as if coming from the TV. He shouldn't have watched. The words sent a chill through my body, freezing me in place. I stared at the blank screen, unsure of what was happening. I looked around the room, my pulse racing, but there was no one else there. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. But the voice, it wasn't my imagination. It had been real. Story 17. It was an ordinary evening when I sat down at my desk, ready to catch up on emails. The soft hum of my computer filled the room, and I absent-mindedly scrolled through the messages, deleting spam and responding to a few work inquiries. Everything felt typical until I noticed an unfamiliar subject line in my inbox. Short, cryptic, and from an email address I didn't recognize. Curiosity piqued, I clicked open the message, expecting it to be another junk email or perhaps a mistake. The body of the message was simple. It contained a single line of text. Click the link. Below it, a URL that appeared to be a shortened link. I hesitated for only a moment, my mind racing through possible scenarios. Was this some kind of phishing attempt? Was it a virus or malware? But then again, I thought, maybe it was something harmless. I have reached my full potential of proficiency. I have qualified for this job. Someone trying to share a funny video or link to something interesting. My curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked the link without thinking twice. The second I clicked, the screen went completely black. The sudden darkness startled me, and I instinctively tried to move the mouse, thinking it was a glitch, or that the screen had gone into sleep mode. I pressed keys trying to wake it up, but nothing worked. My stomach dropped as I realized that I wasn't just looking at a dark screen. The entire system seemed to be frozen. The lights on my keyboard dimmed, and the sound of the whirring fan in my computer ceased. I sat there in the dark, heart pounding, staring at the unresponsive screen. Then, to my horror, I noticed something even more disturbing. The small green light on my webcam, previously off, flashed to life. The faint, almost imperceptible glow was enough to make my blood run cold. I hadn't activated the camera, so how was it on? It wasn't supposed to be. My mind raced with terrifying thoughts. Someone was watching me. The thoughts sent a wave of nausea through me. I quickly tried to close the application using the task manager, but I couldn't. The system was still locked down, frozen. And then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of someone breathing, slow and deliberate, coming through my speakers. It wasn't the kind of breath you make when you're exerting yourself, but rather the shallow, quiet inhale of someone waiting, watching, listening. I froze, my entire body rigid with fear. My heart started pounding louder in my ears, and my hands grew clammy. Who was on the other side of my computer? How could they be listening to me? The breathing continued, steady and unbroken, filling the silence in the room. It was too real, too close, like someone was sitting just inches away from me, watching my every move. My eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything that could explain what was happening, but the darkness of my screen and the eerie quiet of my surroundings made it feel like I was in a void, completely isolated. I tried to speak, to yell out for help, but no words came. My throat tightened, as if the very air had thickened around me. In a panic, I yanked the laptop away from my desk, as though putting some distance between myself and the screen would somehow stop whatever was happening. But as I moved it, the screen flickered and then flashed a bright, blinding white. I quickly closed my eyes, shielding them from the brightness. When I opened them again, the screen had returned to black, but the breathing continued. It was louder now, closer, like whoever was watching me had moved just a little bit nearer. I pulled at the cable, trying to disconnect the power, but the laptop was stuck, its power button unresponsive. I could feel my heart racing, my thoughts clouded with panic. The voice, the breath, was now accompanied by faint sounds of movement, as if whoever was watching me was shifting in their seat, perhaps leaning closer to the camera. I thought I heard a soft rustling noise in the background, as though the person was speaking to someone else, or perhaps simply to themselves. My mind screamed for answers, but all I could do was sit there, in the thick, paralyzing fear, unable to move, unable to think clearly. Then, for a brief moment, the sound stopped. The room felt unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that feels more oppressive than comforting. I dared to take a shaky breath, hoping, praying, that whatever had been happening was over. But it wasn't. The screen flickered again, and for a split second I thought I saw something, a shadow, move across it, like a figure in the corner of my screen. Before I could register it, the breathing started again, this time more erratic, faster, as though the person was growing more impatient. In a frantic state, I grabbed my phone, trying to reach out to a friend, to anyone who could help, but the screen was still black, and I could see no way to escape the situation. I could feel the oppressive weight of the camera staring at me, my every movement being watched by someone I couldn't even see. What did they want from me? Why hadn't I clicked the link? Why was this happening? Suddenly, the screen flashed once more, and for a brief moment I saw something. Something that made my blood run cold. It was a single word, typed out in a stark white font across the black screen. Run. The letters lingered for a moment, almost as if they were burning into my mind, before disappearing. And then the breathing stopped. Story 18. It had been a normal evening, or at least I thought it was. I was on a video call with my friend Sarah, catching up on the past few weeks. We talked about everything from the latest Netflix series to the mundane details of our day-to-day lives. The conversation was lighthearted, filled with laughter and the occasional moment of silence as we checked our phones or sipped our drinks. It felt like just another regular conversation, until my phone screen suddenly went black. At first I thought it was a glitch, a poor connection, or maybe my phone had died. I pressed the side button to wake the screen, but it stayed dark. I tried swiping the screen and even held down the power button, hoping to force a restart, but nothing worked. My heart skipped a beat when I realized the video chat wasn't completely gone. I could still hear Sarah's voice, clear and uninterrupted, as though the call had continued without any issue. I waited, hoping it was just a temporary glitch. Maybe the screen was malfunctioning, but the audio would return to normal once I got the screen back on. I glanced at the battery icon in the corner of my phone. It was at 65%, plenty of charge to get through the rest of the call. The fact that I could still hear Sarah's voice made it seem like everything was fine, even if I couldn't see her face. But something about the way she was speaking didn't sit right with me. At first, Sarah's voice was still lively, just as it had been before the screen went dark. She was talking about a new project at work, her words flowing naturally. But then, halfway through a sentence, something shifted. Her voice seemed to drop in volume slightly, almost as though it was coming from farther away. It wasn't just a distance, though. It sounded as though her tone was becoming more distant in a different way. The warmth I usually heard in her voice was starting to fade, and something cold was creeping in. I tried pressing the side button again, just to make sure I wasn't imagining things, but the screen stayed black, and now I was starting to feel an uneasy knot tighten in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing, just some weird technical issue maybe. But then Sarah's voice stopped abruptly in the middle of a sentence. There was no fading out, no static or glitch. It was as if someone had just pressed the pause button in the middle of her words. The silence that followed was eerie, the kind of stillness that felt like it had stretched on for far too long. I held the phone up to my ear, listening intently for any sign of life from the other end, but there was nothing. My thoughts began to race, and I glanced around the room nervously. The walls felt suddenly much closer, and my skin prickled as though something was wrong, like something was watching me. I didn't know what to do. I could feel a strange heaviness in the air, and the coldness from before seemed to intensify. I forced myself to focus, telling myself it was all in my head. I called out Sarah's name, hoping for some response. Maybe she'd lost connection on her end, or maybe something had happened to her phone. I called her name again, louder this time, but the silence persisted. The stillness was suffocating, and the longer the silence stretched, the more unsettled I became. I brought the phone up to my ear again, trying to hear some sign. No voice. Then, just as suddenly as the silence had taken over, a faint, distorted sound came through the speaker. It wasn't Sarah's voice, though. It was something deeper, more guttural, like the sound of someone trying to speak from the farthest reaches of a dream, as though their words had been twisted and muffled beyond recognition. I froze, my blood running cold. The noise was foreign, and even though I couldn't make out what was being said, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. I pulled the phone away from my ear, my heart racing. My fingers shook as I tried again to get the screen to turn on, but still there was nothing. The distorted sound continued, growing louder and more erratic, until it almost sounded like static. But underneath that, there were whispers. Whispers that seemed to be calling my name. I pressed the phone to my ear once more, trembling now, as the whispers became more pronounced. It was as if someone, or something, was right there with me, breathing in the space between us. Without thinking, I yanked the phone away from my ear and tried to hang up, but the screen remained black. I pressed the power button, held it down for several seconds, but there was no response. My phone wouldn't turn off, and the static, the whispers, continued to reverberate in my ears. My anxiety soared, and I could feel the bile rise in the back of my throat. Something was seriously wrong, and I didn't know how to fix it. My mind screamed for me to just toss the phone aside, to get away from it, but I couldn't move. Then the whispers abruptly stopped. The sudden silence felt even more unnatural than the noises had. I stared at the black screen, waiting for something, anything, to happen. My mind was racing, trying to find some logical explanation, but there was nothing. The phone remained dark, lifeless. It was like the world had stopped, or like the phone was no longer a part of it. In a last-ditch effort, I pulled the battery from the phone, hoping that would somehow reset it. As soon as the battery disconnected, the phone went completely dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at the now useless device in my hands. The adrenaline was still coursing through me, my heart pounding in my chest. What had just happened? Was it a malfunction? A glitch? Or had someone been on the other end of that call? I didn't know, and the uncertainty was far worse than any answer. I didn't have the courage to put the battery back in that night. The phone stayed off, abandoned on my desk, as I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched. It took me hours to fall asleep, and even then, I didn't rest easily. I kept hearing faint whispers in the dark, wondering if they were real or just my mind replaying that terrifying moment. The next morning, I tried calling Sarah back, but her phone went straight to voicemail. And when I finally got through to her a few days later, she seemed just as confused as I was. She hadn't heard anything strange at all, but I knew what I'd heard, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened during that call wasn't over. Story 19. I had been enjoying a quiet evening in my apartment, a welcome break after a hectic week of work. The kind of night where you can finally relax, pour a drink, and settle in with something light on TV. I had my laptop open, watching an old movie I'd been meaning to revisit for ages. The room was dimly lit, with just the soft glow from the screen illuminating the space, making everything feel cozy and calm. The movie was reaching its climax when, without warning, the screen went black. No error message, no pop-up window, just sudden, absolute darkness. I leaned forward, pressing the power button, but nothing happened. The silence in the room deepened, and I could feel my pulse quicken. The laptop had worked fine up until that point, and now it was as if it had just died on me for no reason at all. Just as I was about to plug it into the charger, hoping the battery had just given out, I heard a knock at the door. It was a sharp, deliberate knock, not frantic, but slow and measured, almost like someone waiting patiently on the other side. My heart skipped. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I hadn't heard anyone approach the building. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I hesitated for a moment before getting up to investigate. I moved cautiously toward the door, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it a neighbor? Maybe someone from the building who had the wrong apartment number. But the knock had felt different, too intentional, too precise. I reached for the doorknob, my fingers trembling just a bit, and slowly pulled the door open, expecting to see someone standing there. But the hallway outside was empty, no one. I stared down the dimly lit corridor, my pulse pounding in my ears. The hallway was quiet, still, as if no one had been there at all. The building was old, and the walls creaked with the usual sounds of settling, but this silence felt heavier, somehow. I stepped out of my apartment, half expecting to see someone lingering just out of sight, but the hallway was completely deserted. I took a few tentative steps, looking both ways, wondering if I had imagined the knock. But the longer I stood there, the more the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. The silence seemed too profound, too absolute. It was almost as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I checked the time on my phone, just a few minutes past 9. There were no neighbors outside their doors, no distant chatter from the apartments further down. It was as if the entire world had gone quiet. I stepped back into my apartment, closing the door softly behind me. The unease in my chest lingered, gnawing at me as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I stood still in the middle of the room, listening for any sound from the hallway, but all I could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of the wind outside. The knock had felt real, had been real. But where had the person gone? How had they disappeared so quickly? My thoughts raced. I went back to my laptop, hoping that maybe a restart would fix the issue. But as soon as I touched the power button, I felt the air in the room grow colder. The warmth of the evening seemed to dissipate in an instant, replaced by a heavy chill that made me shiver. I glanced over my shoulder, feeling that same unsettling presence, as if someone or something was in the room with me. I opened the laptop again, but it still wouldn't power on. The screen remained black, mocking me with its lifelessness. I gave up on it for the moment, instead moving to the window to peer out into the street. The streetlights outside cast long, pale shadows on the pavement, and the night seemed as still as the air inside my apartment. There was no sign of anyone outside, no movement, just the occasional flicker of headlights from a distant car. Still, I felt a tightening in my chest, a growing sense that something was wrong. I turned back toward the door. The hallway outside remained silent, and I felt that strange sensation again, like something was watching me, waiting. I checked the locks on the door, even though I knew they were secure. It was almost as if I was trying to reassure myself that I was safe, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't. The knock had come at the most unusual moment, right as my laptop screen had gone black. A coincidence? Maybe. But something about it felt too intentional, as if the two events were linked somehow. I walked to the kitchen, trying to clear my mind, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the hallway, to the knock, to the strange emptiness that had followed. The quiet was suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. As I opened the fridge to get a bottle of water, I heard it again. This time it was fainter, but unmistakable, a soft, distant knock, almost like a tapping, coming from the direction of the door. I froze, the bottle slipping from my fingers and falling to the floor with a soft thud. My heart raced, and my breath hitched in my throat. There was no mistaking it. The knock was real. I turned slowly, my eyes darting to the door, which was still firmly closed. For a moment, I just stood there, too afraid to move, as if the knock had paralyzed me. It was as though whatever was on the other side of that door had a presence, an energy that I couldn't understand, but could definitely feel. The silence after the knock was thick, almost oppressive, and I wondered if it would happen again. If I waited long enough, would I hear that tap again? After what felt like an eternity, I cautiously approached the door once more. This time I didn't open it. I simply stood there, my hand on the knob, listening. There was no sound, no knock, no footsteps in the hallway. Just the quiet of the apartment, the quiet of the world. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had knocked at my door wasn't finished with me yet. Story 20. I had just finished setting up my new smart TV. After a long day of assembling furniture and arranging cables, I was finally ready to relax. The TV was sleek and modern, with a large, impressive screen that promised an immersive viewing experience. I eagerly powered it up, the screen lighting up with the initial setup instructions, and for a few minutes, everything went smoothly. The vibrant colors and crisp picture were everything I'd hoped for. But then, just as I was about to dive into the TV's settings, the screen went black. I wasn't sure what had happened. I thought it might be an issue with the connection, maybe a glitch in the initial setup. I pressed a few buttons on the remote, but nothing happened. I waited for a few moments, hoping the TV would come back on by itself, but it remained dark. Just when I was about to check the power cable, the screen flickered back to life. The TV came on, but it wasn't the same. For a split second, I froze. The screen was completely black, yet I could clearly see a reflection. It wasn't my reflection. The figure in the darkened screen wasn't me, and it wasn't anyone I recognized. It was a blurry silhouette, but it was enough to make my heart race. I blinked a few times, trying to process what I was seeing. The reflection wasn't even in the right position. It was as if the person were standing behind the TV, but I was alone in the room. I stepped back from the TV, my pulse quickening. I glanced around the room, half expecting someone to jump out at me, but there was no one there. I approached the TV cautiously, trying to make sense of the strange image. It didn't seem like a trick of the light or a shadow from another object in the room. The figure was too defined, too clear, even though the screen itself was entirely dark. I leaned in closer, squinting, and the image seemed to distort slightly, but the figure remained. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for the remote, pressing buttons to turn the TV off, but nothing happened. The figure remained frozen in the reflection, as if mocking me. I turned to the power button on the TV itself, but as I reached for it, the image seemed to change. The person in the reflection moved, just slightly. Their head turned, and I could see their eyes black, hollow, and empty, staring directly at me. It felt like a jolt of ice shot through my body. I stumbled back, my heart racing. I knew I wasn't imagining it. The reflection blinked. I had to be dreaming. I looked again. It blinked. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen, yet every part of me screamed to look away. I tried to breathe deeply, forcing myself to stay calm, to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was some weird, malfunctioning feature of the TV, some strange optical illusion or glitch. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, but that thought didn't make the cold dread crawling up my spine any less real. After what felt like an eternity, the reflection blinked again, and then finally, the figure seemed to vanish. The TV screen went back to being just black, but now it felt wrong. I hesitated, standing there for a moment, unsure of what to do. My mind was racing. Should I turn off the TV completely, or should I try to reset it? I wondered if there was a setting I had accidentally triggered. But there was no way I could ignore what had just happened. Something had been watching me through the screen, and it wasn't part of the TV's design. I picked up my phone and searched for answers. I googled smart TV reflection glitch and strange black screen reflections, but nothing seemed to match what I had experienced. The closest thing I could find were stories about TVs showing bizarre patterns or colors due to software issues, but nothing that described a figure, a human form appearing in the reflection. The more I read, the more my anxiety grew. There were a few threads about odd glitches, but nothing that truly explained what I had seen. I decided to turn off the TV, but I didn't want to look at the screen for even one more second. I hit the power button on the remote and backed away, holding my breath. The screen remained black, and the room felt eerily silent. I waited for a few minutes, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I could go back to using the TV like normal. But the unease in my chest didn't subside. My instincts told me to leave it off for the night, to not risk encountering whatever that figure was again. I went to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. My mind kept replaying that moment when the figure blinked, when their hollow eyes seemed to lock onto mine. I tried to convince myself that it was a fluke, a trick of the light, or some weird bug in the TV's software. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the feeling of being watched never left. I kept thinking that maybe I had missed something. Maybe there was an explanation, but nothing made sense. It was as though the TV itself had become a portal to something wrong. The next morning, I was still shaken. I walked into the living room and stood in front of the TV, trying to convince myself that it was just a malfunction. I turned it on again, slowly, cautiously, my eyes scanning the screen for any signs of the reflection. This time, everything seemed normal, just the TV's home screen, with no eerie figures or unsettling shadows. But as I watched, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The TV wasn't just a piece of technology anymore. It felt like a window, one that shouldn't have been opened. I still have the TV, and it works fine now. But every time I turn it on, a part of me waits for that moment to flicker. The reflection, the presence that shouldn't be there. I've tried to tell myself it was just a glitch, but deep down I know what I saw. And I can't shake the feeling that the next time I turn the TV on, the figure will be there again, waiting. Story 21. It was a quiet evening, and I was curled up in bed, my phone in hand as I lazily scrolled through my gallery. I had spent hours earlier taking pictures during a hike, and now I was revisiting the memories of that day. The images brought a smile to my face, and for a moment, I lost track of time. As I swiped through the pictures, something strange happened. The screen flickered for a brief second, and then, without warning, it went completely black. I blinked, puzzled, and pressed the power button on my phone to turn it back on. It wasn't unusual for my phone to glitch sometimes, but I had never seen it completely shut down like that. After a few seconds of staring at the black screen, my phone finally rebooted, and the familiar lock screen appeared. I unlocked it, ready to continue where I left off, but what I saw next made my heart stop. A new picture had appeared in my gallery. It wasn't a photo I had taken, nor had I ever seen it before. It was a picture of me lying in my bed, looking as if I had been asleep. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the bedside lamp. I was sprawled on my side, my face relaxed, eyes closed, and my phone nowhere in sight. My breath caught in my throat, and a chill ran down my spine. I felt my pulse quicken, and I immediately began scrolling through the gallery, hoping it was just some weird glitch or a trick of the light. But no, the picture was real, too real. It was taken from the foot of my bed, the angle slightly off-center, almost as if someone had been standing in the doorway when they snapped it. I quickly swiped to the next image, but there was nothing there. Just the other photos I had taken earlier that day, nothing unusual, nothing out of place. I stared at the picture again, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was an old photo I had forgotten about, a selfie I had taken in my sleep. But the more I looked at it, the more wrong it felt. The picture was too clear, too vivid, as though it had been taken only minutes ago. My heart was pounding in my chest as I checked the date and time on the image. The timestamp showed that it was taken just minutes before the phone had rebooted. It didn't make sense. I had been holding the phone in my hand the whole time. Panicking now, I went into my phone's settings to check for any unusual activity. I scrolled through the apps, looking for anything that might explain what had just happened, but everything seemed normal. No new apps had been installed, no suspicious files. I tried to shake the growing feeling of unease, but the picture of me in my bed lingered in my mind. I couldn't get rid of the image of myself, seemingly unaware that someone had been watching me. Trying to calm myself down, I decided to delete the photo. But as I tapped the trash icon, my phone froze for a moment before a now message popped up on the screen. I cannot delete this file. I stared at the message in disbelief. How was it possible? I had deleted plenty of pictures before without issue. I tried again, and once more the same message appeared. A cold dread settled over me, and the sensation that I was no longer in control of my own phone began to grow. I opened the gallery again, hoping that the photo would be gone, but it was still there. This time there was another photo taken from the same angle, but I wasn't in bed anymore. The room was darker now, the shadows deeper. The bed was empty, but the covers were tossed around as if someone had been lying there recently. The faintest outline of my pillow could be seen, as though the camera had caught the after effects of my presence. A feeling of nausea washed over me. The more I tried to make sense of the situation, the more twisted it seemed. My mind raced, trying to come up with explanations. Could someone have hacked my phone? Was this some kind of cruel joke, or worse, had someone been in my room without me knowing? I got out of bed and checked the locks on my door, the windows, and even under the bed, but everything seemed fine. No signs of forced entry, nothing out of place. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that second photo, the emptiness of my bed, as though something or someone had just left. I checked the gallery again, but now the photos were multiplying. The first photo of me in bed had been joined by several others, each one more disturbing than the last. One showed my bedroom door slightly ajar, as if someone had been standing in the doorway and taking pictures of me while I slept. Another showed my phone on the nightstand, but the lighting in the room was different, darker, with an unnatural shadow stretching across the floor. I backed away from the phone, feeling a surge of panic. Who had been in my room? How could they have done this? The photos were too real, too detailed. I couldn't deny what was happening, but I didn't want to believe it either. There had to be an explanation, something logical, but nothing I could think of made sense. I tried to call a friend, but when I went to unlock my phone, it froze again. The screen turned black once more, and when it rebooted, there was yet another photo waiting for me. This one was different, though. It was a close-up shot of my face. I was wide awake this time, my eyes open, staring directly at the camera. But I hadn't taken the picture someone else had. My skin went cold as I recognized the background. It was my room, the very same room I was sitting in now, but I hadn't heard anyone enter. My heart raced in my chest as I dropped the phone, unable to process what was happening. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on me, my thoughts spinning, and I knew one thing with terrifying clarity: someone had been watching me. And now they were somehow controlling my phone. I didn't know how or why, but I had to get out of the house. I grabbed my bag, heading for the door, praying that the nightmare would end before it was too late. Story 22. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through photos on my phone, when I decided to edit a picture I had taken the day before. It was a simple shot of the city skyline, just before sunset, with the colors of the sky blending into soft pinks and purples. I had always enjoyed photography, and the picture had come out pretty well, though I thought I could enhance it just a little more. I opened my editing app, tapped the photo, and began to adjust the brightness, the contrast, and the sharpness, tweaking the image to bring out more of the colors. As I was working on the photo, my phone suddenly blinked and went completely black. For a moment I thought the battery had died, but the phone didn't shut off, it was still on, just frozen. I pressed the power button, hoping to wake it up, but nothing happened. The screen remained dark, and I felt a small surge of frustration rise inside me. I had been editing the photo for only a few minutes, but it felt like everything had just ground to a halt. After about 10 seconds, the phone powered up again with its usual startup sound. The familiar logo appeared, and I sighed in relief. At first, I thought maybe it had just been a glitch, nothing more. But when the phone came back to the home screen, I immediately noticed something strange. The photo I had been editing wasn't where I had left it. Instead of the sunset sky I remembered, the image was entirely different. The skyline was there, but the colors had shifted darker, almost ominous. And the most unsettling thing was the figure standing in the foreground. Someone I didn't recognize, their face obscured by shadows. I stared at the screen, unsure if my eyes were playing tricks on me. I was certain the photo hadn't looked like this before. I scrolled through the editing app to see if I had accidentally saved a different version, but no, this was the only one. There was no way I could have changed the image that drastically without noticing, not when I had spent time carefully adjusting the colors. And yet there it was, a completely altered version of the photo with a figure I hadn't seen before. I tried to undo the changes, tapping the revert button, but it didn't do anything. The photo stayed exactly as it was, with the mysterious figure standing unnervingly close to the camera. I zoomed in, trying to make sense of it. The person in the photo was blurry, their face barely visible, but their presence was undeniable. They were standing so close that it almost looked like they were part of the scene, like they belonged there. But I knew for a fact that no one had been there when I took the picture. I had been alone, in the quiet of my apartment, with no one else in sight. A sense of dread crept over me. I had no idea how this figure had appeared in the photo, or why the image had changed so dramatically. I couldn't stop looking at it. The person's outline seemed to shift slightly with each passing second, as though they were moving, as if the figure was alive, somehow adjusting itself at the light. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, thinking that maybe I was just seeing things. But when I looked again, the figure was still there, the dark shadows on their face more pronounced, the feeling of something unnatural growing stronger. I closed the photo and reopened it several times, hoping that restarting the app might fix the problem. But no matter how many times I did it, the image remained unchanged. The figure was still there, standing in the foreground of the photo, its presence growing more pronounced the longer I stared at it. It felt as if the figure was watching me, as if it was aware of my confusion and fear. I turned off the phone, thinking that maybe a full reboot would help. When the screen went black, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. When I turned the phone back on, I expected everything to be fine, that the photo would return to its original state. But when the screen lit up, I felt my stomach tighten. The figure in the photo had moved. It wasn't in the same position anymore. The shadows on the person's face were darker, more defined, and now their eyes, though still obscured, seemed more prominent, like they were staring right at me. The photo had somehow changed while the phone was off. I didn't understand how it was possible. There was no way the image could alter itself like that, not unless something unnatural was at work. I opened the photo again, my fingers trembling as I zoomed in on the figure's face. The more I looked at it, the more I felt as if I was being pulled into the photo, as if the person in the image was trying to reach out to me. I turned the phone sideways, hoping that would change the perspective, but it didn't. The figure was still there, the atmosphere of the photo becoming increasingly oppressive, like the entire scene was suffocating me. I couldn't look away from the eyes, or what I thought were eyes, even though they were hidden in the shadows. There was something deeply unsettling about it. I tried everything I could think of to fix it. I attempted to crop the photo, to apply a new filter, anything to erase the figure and return the image to its original state. But every time I made a change, the figure somehow adjusted, like it was adapting to whatever I did. I was growing desperate. My heart was racing, my palms sweaty as I felt a cold chill creep down my spine. I had to make it stop. I had to get rid of whatever was happening to my phone. Then, just as I was about to give up, the phone vibrated in my hand. I jumped, nearly dropping it. A new notification appeared on the screen, one I didn't recognize. It was a simple text, with only a single line of words: "You can't escape me." My breath caught in my throat, and I stared at the screen, the blood draining from my face. I didn't know who had sent it. There was no contact name, no number, just that chilling message. The phone began to glitch again, the photo warping as though it were melting. I could hear the hum of the screen, a strange noise that sounded almost like a whisper. The last thing I saw before the phone powered down completely was the figure, its eyes now fully visible, locked directly onto mine. They weren't just watching me, they were waiting, and I didn't know for what. Story 23. It was around midnight when my computer screen went black. I was deep into a late-night research session, scrolling through pages of articles for a project that was due the next day. The room was quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the computer and the occasional tap of my fingers on the keyboard. But suddenly, the screen flickered once, twice, and then everything went dark. It wasn't the usual kind of screen freeze, where you can just restart and pick up where you left off. This felt different, like something had just changed. I sat there for a moment, staring at the blank screen, wondering if the computer had crashed. I tapped a few keys and tried moving the mouse, but nothing happened. The power light on the CPU blinked once, then stayed solid. I waited, my heart starting to race a little, but after a few seconds, the screen suddenly lit up again. I didn't even need to touch the mouse to bring it back. The desktop appeared, but there was something off about it. My usual icons were there, but there was one I hadn't seen before, a folder, sitting in the middle of the screen, labeled simply "You." I stared at the folder, feeling an odd, cold knot form in my stomach. I didn't recognize it, and I was sure it hadn't been there before the screen went black. The label was strange too, just the word "You" in bold, unambiguous text, as though it was deliberately placed there for me to notice. I moved the cursor over it, hesitating. Part of me told me to leave it alone, to shut down the computer and go to bed. But the curiosity gnawed at me, and I clicked on the folder. It opened immediately, revealing several files inside. At first glance, the pseudonyms didn't mean anything to me. There were a few labeled with dates, others with random combinations of letters and numbers. But there was one file that caught my attention. It was a video file, and its name was simply my first name. I felt a shiver run down my spine. How could my name be in there? I hadn't saved anything to my computer tonight, at least not anything with my name attached to it. With a sinking feeling, I clicked on the video file. The screen flickered briefly before the video began to play. I sat frozen in my chair, watching it unfold. It was a grainy recording, shaky as if filmed with a handheld camera. I could barely make out the background, but then it cleared, and I saw something that made my heart stop. It was me. The video was of me sitting at my desk, exactly where I was right now, working on my computer. The camera was pointed at me from behind, just barely visible in the corner of the frame. My posture, the way my fingers hovered over the keyboard, the faint glow of the screen lighting up my face, all of it was captured in this strange video. I could feel my pulse quickening, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as I watched myself, completely unaware of the camera. The video continued, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. It wasn't like any video I had made. I had never recorded myself working at this desk. I hadn't even been aware of anything filming me. And yet, here it was. A perfect representation of my late-night session, only it was as though someone had been in the room with me, watching me the whole time. The sound was barely audible, just the faint clicking of the keyboard and the low hum of my computer. It was so ordinary, so normal. But then something in the video changed. The footage blurred for a moment, as if the camera had been moved, and when it cleared, the angle was different. Now I could see the reflection of my own face on the screen, looking back at me through the webcam. I froze. I hadn't turned on my webcam. In fact, I had disabled it months ago after a close friend had warned me about security concerns. But there it was, my own image on the screen, staring at me with wide eyes. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't make myself press anything. I wanted to stop the video, wanted to escape from whatever this was, but I felt rooted to my chair, paralyzed with a mix of fear and disbelief. The video continued, showing me in perfect detail, just as I was right now. Then, the camera slowly zoomed in on my face. I could see my own eyes, wide and frantic, as if I was suddenly aware of something or someone watching me. Suddenly, the video cut to black. My heart thudded in my chest as the screen went completely dark again, just as it had earlier. I waited breathless, expecting the video to come back on, but it didn't. The black screen stretched on for what felt like an eternity. My mind raced, and I quickly moved the mouse, trying to wake the screen back up. When it finally flickered back to life, the folder labeled "You" was still there, but now something was different. Another file had appeared inside it. This one was a text document, and the title was my full name, followed by a date just a few days from now. Hesitantly, I clicked on the file and it opened. The first line of text made my blood run cold. "I see you." I read the words again, trying to make sense of them. Who had written this? Why was it in my computer? My eyes skimmed down the page, but the rest of the document was just a string of random characters, nothing coherent, just nonsensical gibberish. I scrolled down, hoping for some kind of explanation, but the further I went, the more the words seemed to blur together. It was like someone had tried to write something, but couldn't quite manage to form sentences. I sat back in my chair, my head spinning. There was no logical explanation for any of this. No reason why someone would have access to my computer, or why they would leave these strange files. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. Suddenly, the power flickered. The lights in the room dimmed for a second, and I could feel my heart race in my chest. The computer screen went black again, but this time, the silence in the room felt different. It was as if something was waiting. I didn't know what to do. But before I could reach for the power button to shut the computer down, I heard it just a faint whisper, like a voice coming from the speakers. "I see you," it said again, clearer this time, almost like a breath in my ear. And then everything went silent. Story 24. I had been driving for hours. The soft hum of the engine and the occasional turn of the GPS app my only companions in the quiet, moonlit night. The road stretched out in front of me, endless and dark, as I made my way through the outskirts of town toward a friend's house. The GPS was guiding me, as it always did, through a series of unfamiliar backroads. The app's voice was a steady presence, helping me navigate through the winding curves and sharp turns in the unfamiliar terrain. Suddenly, without warning, the screen went black. I glanced down at my phone, expecting to see some kind of glitch or connection issue, but the device was unresponsive. I tapped the screen a few times, but there was no change. The eerie quiet of the car seemed to grow louder as I sat in the dark, my thoughts drifting in a spiral of irritation and confusion. I was still driving, but now I was uncertain of whether I was following the correct path, and my frustration began to grow. I pulled over to the side of the road, deciding to restart the app. Maybe it had frozen or crashed. But as soon as I pressed the power button, the phone blinked back to life. The screen lit up again, but not with the GPS map I had expected. Instead, a new message appeared, one that made my blood run cold. "You're not alone." My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the words for a moment, unsure if I was reading them correctly. The message was cryptic, unsettling, and out of place. Who would send me something like that? And more importantly, how did it even get there? I checked the screen for any signs that the message was part of an ad or some strange notification, but everything seemed normal. The app wasn't open anymore, and the text appeared as though it had been inserted into a blank screen. There were no numbers or names associated with the message, nothing to indicate where it had come from. I scanned the area around me, my eyes darting from the dark road to the tree line that surrounded the path. The silence of the night felt heavier now, as if something was off, as if something was watching me. The message kept blinking at me, its simple words taking on an ominous weight the longer I stared at them. I glanced around again, my breath coming in shallow bursts. I had pulled over to the side of the road, and there was no one else in sight. The headlights from my car illuminated the trees and the road ahead, but everything felt empty, eerily so. The quiet felt too still, too unnatural. I turned off the car for a moment, my hands trembling as I tried to think clearly. Could this be some kind of joke, or was someone playing a prank on me? It didn't make sense. I turned my attention back to the phone, tapping the screen again to see if I could make the message disappear. But no matter how many times I touched it, the words remained. The app had somehow stopped working, and no matter what I did, I couldn't get the GPS to open. The message lingered on the screen like a strange, silent warning. My mind raced with thoughts. Was I being hacked? And could someone have gained access to my phone? I ran through a list of possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself it was a glitch, deep down I knew something felt wrong. The unsettling sensation in the pit of my stomach only grew stronger. I looked around the car again, half expecting to see someone lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. There was nothing. The road was empty, the trees quiet. But as I stared at the dark shadows stretching across the pavement, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't as alone as I thought. A sudden noise broke the stillness, a twig snapping in the distance, just beyond the trees. My body went rigid. I felt my pulse quicken, my mind flashing with 100 irrational thoughts. Was someone out there? Had they been watching me the entire time? My eyes darted back to the phone in my hands. I had to do something. I couldn't sit here feeling paranoid and helpless, letting the message fester in my mind. I tried calling a friend, but the phone line was eerily quiet, no ringing, just silence. The screen didn't change, still filled with those haunting words. I considered driving away, getting back onto the road and away from whatever was lurking in the dark. But the uncertainty of not knowing what was going on kept me rooted to the spot. What if it was a trick? What if something worse was waiting out there? My thoughts spiraled. Could this message have come from someone nearby? I thought about all the times I had read stories about people being followed or stalked in seemingly random ways. The words on the screen seemed to confirm my worst fears, yet I had no idea where to go from here. I wasn't even sure if I should trust the phone anymore. The technology I had relied on for so long now felt like it had betrayed me, serving as the messenger for a threat I didn't understand. Suddenly, another sound broke through the quiet, closer this time. A car engine, faint but unmistakable. I froze, straining my ears. My headlights reflected off something in the distance, headlights from another car, approaching from behind. The moment I saw the lights, panic surged through me. I glanced at the screen again, hoping that the message would change, that the app would return to normal, but nothing changed. It was still there. You're not alone. I turned the ignition and drove off quickly, the tires crunching against the gravel. The other car remained in my rearview mirror, distant at first, but gradually gaining on me. I could see the outline of the vehicle, but it wasn't clear enough to identify. My heart raced as I accelerated, the headlights of the other car drawing closer. I told myself it was just another driver, that I was overreacting. But deep down I knew something was wrong. The message on the screen had been a warning, an inescapable reality that I couldn't ignore. As I sped down the dark road, I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how far I went, no matter how fast I drove, the words on my phone would follow me. You're not alone. I didn't know who was behind it or what they wanted, but I knew one thing for sure. My night had taken a terrifying turn, and I was no longer in control. Story 25. It was late in the evening, and I was lounging on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through my phone. The soft light from the screen illuminated the dark room, casting long shadows on the walls. I wasn't particularly doing anything important, just flicking through contacts and checking messages. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the wind outside were the only background noises, making the silence feel heavier than usual. I was about to scroll past my contacts when the screen suddenly flickered and went completely black. My thumb hesitated above the phone, unsure of what had just happened. I pressed the power button, expecting the phone to respond, but there was no change. A cold knot of unease began to form in my stomach as I tried again, but the screen remained dark. I could hear the soft, rhythmic thrum of the phone's vibrations in my hand, but nothing else seemed to work. Just as I was about to set the phone down and assume it had malfunctioned, the screen blinked back to life. A new text message had appeared, but it was from a number I didn't recognize. My first instinct was to dismiss it as a wrong number, but the message itself made my blood run cold. "I'm watching you," it read, the words standing out in stark contrast to the otherwise calm, ordinary night. My thumb hovered over the screen, unsure of how to respond. The message felt like a cruel joke, but there was something about it that made my skin prickle. I knew nobody who would send something like that, certainly not a friend or family member. My thoughts raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation, but the message only seemed to grow more ominous the longer I stared at it. I glanced around the room, suddenly feeling exposed, as if the walls were closing in on me. My apartment, usually a safe haven, now felt foreign, even hostile. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker, more oppressive. The thought that someone might be watching me from the outside, from some hidden corner of the apartment, made my breath catch in my throat. I quickly checked the number, hoping to find some clue as to who it might be, but the digits were untraceable. There were no social media profiles attached, no identifiable name. It was a standard, anonymous number, like one of those that might come from a burner phone. My heart started to pound in my chest, and I felt the all too familiar pulse of anxiety creeping in. Who would send a message like this, and why? My phone buzzed again, making me jump. I picked it up almost reflexively, my eyes scanning the screen for another message. "You can't hide from me," it said, even more chilling than the first. My hands trembled as I set the phone back down, feeling the weight of each word. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting or if there was something more sinister at play, but the idea that someone knew where I was, could be watching me right now, made my stomach turn. I locked the door behind me and made my way toward the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer outside. The street was empty, and the apartment complex across the way stood silent in the night. No movement, no signs of life. It seemed ridiculous to be standing there, looking for something that wasn't there, but the fear gnawed at me. The darkness outside felt impenetrable, like it was hiding something, someone. My phone buzzed again, this time louder and more insistent. I hesitated before checking it, dread building up in my chest. "I see you through the window." I recoiled as if the words had physically struck me. I glanced quickly toward the window again, my heart racing. The fear I had been trying to suppress hit me like a wave. How could anyone know I was near the window? How could they see me? The apartment was on the 3rd floor. There was no way anyone could be peering in unless they were much closer than I was comfortable with. I pulled the curtain shut and backed away from the window, my mind running wild with possibilities. What kind of person sends a message like that? What did they want? I felt exposed, trapped in my own home. The sudden paranoia was suffocating, and every creak of the floorboards or rustle of the furniture seemed to echo in the silence. I tried to reason with myself. It could be a prank, maybe someone using a fake number, a wrong number, a spam message, or a bot. But deep down, I knew that explanation didn't sit right. The timing was too specific, too calculated. Each message seemed to know just how to push my buttons, to make me question whether I was safe. In a panic, I turned off the phone, hoping to block out the unease that had settled into my bones. But even as I powered it down, I knew it wouldn't help. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching, waiting. I could still feel the weight of the words "I'm watching you" repeating in my mind. There was no way to escape that feeling of being observed. I walked through the apartment, double-checking the locks on every door and window. I turned on every light in the place, even though I knew it was probably just a form of reassurance. The darkness outside felt less intimidating now, but the fear still clung to me. I tried to steady my breath, reminding myself that there was no way anyone could be here. But with every second that passed, I couldn't shake the thought, what if they were? The phone sat on the kitchen counter, powered off, but the silence felt deafening. I didn't want to turn it back on. I didn't want to see what other messages might come through. But even more, I didn't want to be left in the dark, wondering if someone who knew exactly where I was still watching. The feeling of being trapped in my own apartment, with no way to escape whatever was lurking in the shadows, was consuming me. I took a deep breath and forced myself to sit down. I had to find a way to figure out who was behind this, to get some clarity. But as the minutes ticked by, a sickening realization settled in. The only way to make the fear stop was to know who was on the other end of those messages. And that, in itself, terrified me more than anything else. Story 26. It had been a long day, and by the time the blackout hit, I was already half asleep on the couch, my phone resting beside me. One moment the lights flickered and then went out entirely, plunging the house into darkness. I wasn't too surprised. Power outages weren't uncommon in the area, especially after a heavy storm. I fumbled for my phone, hoping to use the flashlight to navigate to the kitchen and grab some candles, but when I turned the screen on, I noticed something strange. The screen was bright, illuminated by a new app icon that hadn't been there before. I had no memory of downloading it, nor did I recognize the name. It was a simple, dark icon with a single, blinking dot in the center, almost like an eye. I didn't think much of it at first. It was possible the blackout had caused some sort of system glitch, but something in my gut told me to be cautious. I hesitated for a moment before tapping the icon, curiosity getting the better of me. The app opened immediately, displaying a live feed of my bedroom. I froze, staring at the screen. The angle was perfect, as if someone had placed a camera in the corner of my room, capturing the bed, the dresser, and the shadows of the room in eerie detail. My heart started to race. How was this possible? I hadn't installed any cameras, and there was no way anyone could have gotten into my house during the brief blackout. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it must be a mistake. I quickly closed the app and reopened it, hoping it was just a glitch, but the same feed appeared. I was looking at my own bedroom, watching the dim light from the street lamp outside flicker through the blinds. My bed was empty, but I could see my clothes scattered on the floor, the same as they had been when I left the room earlier that evening. It was exactly how I had left it, yet it felt wrong, like someone was watching me. The feed didn't move. The room remained still and quiet, the shadows dancing slightly with the wind outside. But something about it felt off, like the room was too perfect, too silent. I was aware of every creak of the house, every breath I took. I stood frozen, staring at the screen, unable to look away. My fingers hovered over the phone, the weight of the moment sinking in. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what to do. I swiped left and right, trying to exit the app, but each time I returned to the same live feed. My pulse quickened, and a cold sweat started to form on the back of my neck. I checked my phone's settings. No new apps were listed there. Nothing unusual at all. Yet here it was, this app that I had never seen before, showing me a live feed of my own bedroom. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but I was alone. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't just the app anymore. It was the awareness that something had invaded my privacy, something beyond my understanding. I turned off my phone, hoping the feed would stop, but when I powered it back on, there it was again. The same live feed, the same angle. I tried deleting the app, but it wouldn't let me. Every time I attempted to remove it, the screen flickered and the app reappeared. The strangest thing happened next. As I sat there, heart pounding, staring at the screen, the view of my bedroom began to shift. Slowly, as if someone was moving the camera, the feed tilted and zoomed in on my bed. I could see my pillows, the wrinkles in the blankets, the way the fabric shifted with the faint breeze from the open window. But it wasn't just the room that had changed. The screen seemed to distort, like the room was becoming more vivid, more real. I felt a wave of nausea. I stood up quickly, my legs trembling, and moved toward my bedroom, unsure of what I would find. I turned on the hallway light, half expecting to see someone standing there, or worse, to find the door to my bedroom wide open. But everything appeared normal. My bedroom door was closed, just as I had left it. My phone, however, continued to show the feed, now focused on my bed. I stepped inside, glancing nervously at my phone screen as I crossed the threshold. Nothing had changed in the room. It was exactly as it had been earlier, nothing out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the app was still watching me, monitoring my every movement. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if something were lurking just out of sight. I placed my phone on the nightstand and backed away slowly, my mind racing for some explanation. I couldn't find one. I had no idea how this app had appeared on my phone, and even more unsettling was the fact that it seemed to be tracking my every move. I thought about calling someone, maybe the police, maybe a friend, but the words felt hollow in my mouth. What could I even say? Someone had hacked my phone and was watching me through a hidden camera in my own bedroom. How ridiculous it sounded. Then, just as I was about to leave the room, a new image popped up on the screen. It wasn't my room anymore. The feed had shifted again, this time showing the hallway outside my bedroom door. The camera was positioned as though it had been watching me from the hallway, hidden in the shadows. I turned quickly, my breath catching in my throat. There was nothing there, but the feed on my phone kept showing that same eerie angle of the hallway. I rushed to the door and swung it open, expecting to find anything that would explain what was happening. But the hallway was empty. I glanced back at my phone, but the feed was now frozen, showing only a static image of the dark hallway. I dropped the phone onto the bed, feeling the weight of dread settle over me. The app had stopped working. For now. But I knew that whatever had placed it on my phone, whatever had been watching me through it, hadn't gone away. Something in my gut told me that this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Story 27. It was a quiet night, the kind that invited relaxation. I had just gotten comfortable on the couch, the soft glow of my computer screen casting a gentle light in the dim room. I had decided to settle in for a movie, something to unwind after a long week. The film started without issue, and I sank into the plot, letting the world outside fade away as I followed the characters through their journey. About 20 minutes into the movie, the screen suddenly froze. The picture was stuck, a static frame of the last moment the film played before everything went still. I moved the mouse, clicked the play button again, but nothing happened. I assumed it was just a glitch, something that happens from time to time when streaming videos, so I gave the computer a few moments to reset itself, but the screen remained stubbornly locked. After a minute or so of waiting, I leaned forward, my fingers moving quickly to click through the tabs, trying to reload the page. But as I was about to refresh, something caught my eye. There, in the reflection of the computer monitor, I saw something I hadn't expected. A face. It was not a clear image, more like a faint distortion, but it was unmistakably there, staring back at me. I froze, my heart skipping a beat as I quickly looked up to see if anyone was in the room with me, but there was no one. The reflection in the screen shifted slightly, and I could make out the outlines of eyes, dark, hollow eyes that seemed to glimmer with some unspoken intent. My stomach dropped as I leaned closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The face appeared to be half-formed, not fully visible in the monitor's dark reflection, but it was enough to send a shiver up my spine. It wasn't a mirror image of me, nor was it a reflection from the movie. This face was something entirely separate. Something wrong. Wrong. I blinked, and the face seemed to grow clearer for a fraction of a second. It was pale, too pale, and I could see the hollow spaces where eyes should have been. There were no details, no features, just the eerie outline of something that shouldn't exist in the screen's reflection. My breath caught in my throat, and I quickly reached for the mouse to turn the volume down, but the moment I moved, the face seemed to shift, its eyes following my every motion, almost like it was aware of me. Frozen, I couldn't tear my gaze away from the reflection. The longer I stared at it, the more distorted the face became. The eyes grew larger, darker, until they consumed the entire space within the reflection. The face wasn't just staring anymore, it was watching me. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as if the very atmosphere around me had changed. The room grew colder, and my breath became shallow, each inhale feeling like it was harder to take. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see the movie had resumed, or at least that the page had reloaded. But no, the video was still frozen on that same, unchanging frame. The reflection, however, was no longer just in the monitor. I could swear I could see it in the room with me, its presence creeping along the edges of the screen, slowly stretching outward, like it was pulling itself